CD4. Charlotte leant back in her chair, her eyes now focused on the ceiling. There were two reasons why she wasn't game to look at Joseph. The first was because of the way she knew he would be looking back at her, the hurt and betrayal he would be feeling. The second was even more frightening, in case she saw that look in his eyes she had come to recognize in suspects over the years as guilt. "I'm only trying to do my job," she said, hearing how pathetic that sounded but knowing it was true. "I'm sorry, Joseph, truly I am, but I need to do this. The only clues we have to go on tie our victims to this church and their Bible quotes that you compiled. I just need to officially cross your name off the list so we can move on." Finally bringing her eyes down to his, Charlotte saw the disappointment etched on Joseph's face, hurt evident in every crease. What she failed to see, thankfully, was guilt. But she knew she still had to force herself to reserve judgment. "Are you saying you don't know me well enough, not just as your brother but as a man of the cloth, to know there's no way I had anything to do with this? After everything we've been through as siblings, you're telling me that there's a part of you that thinks I might be responsible for murdering those poor girls? You've got to be joking." He was as angry as Charlotte had ever seen him, his face bright red, fit to burst as he ran his hands over his bald head again and again, trying to regain his composure. "It's no joke," she said. She had to make him understand the gravity of what was happening. "It's just procedure. Don't give me that procedure bullshit!" Joseph shot back at her, venom in his eyes. "I'm your brother, Charlotte. Surely that counts for something, but apparently not." His breathing was heavy now. "Okay, I'll play your little game, and then you can leave. Where was I last night? Right here, preparing for this weekend's mass, like I do every bloody night. That's the lot of a priest, you see. I have to be here for people who need me, when they need me. Is that good enough for you or not?" "Joseph, please, it doesn't have to be like this." Charlotte's heart ached, her throat tight. "Of course I never thought you did it, but you must know I had to ask. I have to tick every box, so that when we catch this bastard and it goes to trial, I can stand in front of the judge and tell him I investigated this fully and professionally. The defense barrister would have a field day if I hadn't even questioned you about anything. I'm sorry, Joseph, but sometimes I have to do things that aren't nice in order to get results. If that upsets you, then that saddens me. But that's your problem, not mine." With that, Joseph stood and walked to the front door. He pulled it open and gestured for her to leave. Without a word, Charlotte got to her feet and walked over. She paused in front of him, standing on tiptoes to kiss him softly on his cheek, feeling the burn of his shame on her lips. Then she stepped out the door into the glare of the midday sun. The altercation had gone pretty much as she'd anticipated. She'd known Joseph would be outraged, but she had achieved what she needed to. At least now she was steadfast in the belief that her brother had nothing to hide. Either that, or he was an incredible liar, which she knew he wasn't. In the glow of the sun, a cool breeze on her face, Charlotte was unexpectedly content. Joseph would come around. He was a smart man and would see reason once the heat went out of the situation. He was one person who knew what it meant to be just doing your job. She strolled out into the car park, passing Joseph's vehicle on the way to her own. Without even intending to, she glanced at his car, her vision taken past the glare on the rear driver's side window to something sitting on the back seat. She took 2 or 3 more steps before she realized what it was. Or at least, what her brain was telling her it was. "No way," she heard her voice say, but her mind seemed no longer connected to her body. Retreating a few paces, Charlotte found herself back at the car window, her hands pressed up against it, forming a makeshift barrier against the shimmering sunlight. She could hardly believe her eyes. Nestled on the back seat, protruding from under a street directory, was a spool of rope, bright green rope, put together in a twirl, the exact same rope she had seen only a few hours earlier, lying at Simon's feet. Chapter 20. You've got to be fucking kidding me. Charlotte was frozen, rooted to the ground like a 100-year-old oak. She couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. All her training and years of criminal investigation told her not to do what she was about to do, but she felt no longer in control. The car was unlocked, the way Joseph always left it, despite her protestations. She slipped her hand into the bottom of her t-shirt to form a makeshift glove, then prized open the back door, hearing it squeak as it stretched wide. Extending her body over the back seat, Charlotte lifted the street directory and stared at the coil of rope beneath. Resting against it was the blade of a bright yellow Stanley knife. The end of the rope was frayed where it had been cut. It was rope. It could be bought anywhere, right? The rest of the back seat was empty, but as she moved back out of the vehicle, she noticed a rectangular lump in the pocket behind the driver's seat. Stretching the top of the beige pocket out towards her, Charlotte peered inside, but could only really make out a black shape, about the size of a glasses case. Curiosity got the better of her, and she reached in, expecting to find a pair of sunglasses. She realized straight away it wasn't a case of any kind, but a purse. A black, intricately patterned leather purse. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. What the hell? Does Joseph have a girlfriend? She popped open the purse and found a small amount of coins and notes in the money section before she turned to study the cards and personal papers. What she saw made her drop the purse as if it had scorched her skin. In the plastic display section was a driver's license belonging to a woman. The other section was stuffed full of an assortment of cards, all belonging to that same woman. The name on that license and those cards was Alice Tremonti. Charlotte reeled backwards out of the car, hands shaking. She grabbed her radio and called for backup. The most difficult request she had ever made in her 20 years on the job. Rubbing her face and pacing back and forth alongside the vehicle, Charlotte's heart gave a leap as Joseph emerged from the rectory, staring at her. "Thought you were leaving," he grumped, his anger clearly still festering. "I would like you to leave right n—" At that moment, he noticed the door of his car was open, and confusion crumpled his already furrowed face. "What are you doing in my car?" He bridged the distance between them so suddenly. Charlotte was forced to do the one thing she hadn't wanted to do, especially without backup, but she had no choice. Stepping into Joseph's path, she raised her hands, praying that the easy option worked. "Just wait there a minute. There are some other police officers on the way. We need to check something out." "Check what out?" he said angrily, trying to push past her with little success. "Get out of my way. I want to see what you've done to my car." "I haven't done anything to your car, but you can't go near it right now," Charlotte said. She clenched her teeth to control the tremor in her voice. "Please, just sit over there and—" Joseph grabbed her by the shoulders, turning her away from him as he tried to get past. If he got to the car, vital evidence could be tampered with, evidence that Charlotte knew could prove his innocence as much as his guilt. Her hand was forced. She grabbed his arm and wrenched it up behind his back in a classic compliance hold. Reaching down, she snuck her handcuffs from their pouch on her belt and cuffed first one hand, then the other. "What the hell? Am I under arrest?" Joseph yelled. "Have you lost your mind?" "Joseph Callahan," Charlotte said, the words choking in her throat. "I must advise you that you are under arrest for the kidnap and murder of Alice Tremonti. You are not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do will be recorded and given in evidence. Do you understand?" Joseph remained silent, but as she sat him down on the grass to wait for backup to arrive, a tear ran down his face, dripping off his chin before splashing onto the concrete path. The worst day in Charlotte's working life had arrived. Like every police station Charlotte had ever been in, the interview rooms at her station were nothing short of disgusting. Bland boxes, the walls of which had, on more than one occasion, been painted, but were already scrawled with graffiti and pockmarked with holes. The rooms were used as holding pens, as much as anything else. What's more, they had a stench all of their own. An aroma of desperation, nervousness, and terror rolled into one delightful cocktail. It was into one of these rooms that she now walked. A uniformed member sat on one side of the interview table, her brother on the other. The whole situation was surreal. Her objectivity well and truly shot, Charlotte knew she had to find a way to get Joseph out of this mess as soon as possible. Deep down, she knew he couldn't have done it, but she also knew that at that moment all the available evidence pointed to him. J.D. beside her, Charlotte took her place on the opposite side of the table to Joseph, freeing up the uniformed copper to leave. She reached across the table for her brother's hand, which he slid away from her, a sneer fixed on his face. "How are you doing?" she asked. "What do you care?" Joseph said. "Just stick to carrying out your job and get this over with. God knows that's all you care about." Charlotte sunk back in her chair, awash with unavoidable regret. She tried to hide her disappointment, but she could feel it practically dripping off her. "Fine," she responded, shuffling her interview papers. "If that's the way you want to play it. But I'm your best chance at getting out of this shit, because unlike everyone else here, I know you, and I know that you couldn't have done this. So while you're hating me, remember that I'm on your side. I follow where the evidence takes me, and right now, it's taking me to you." She peeled the plastic wrapping off a 3-pack of DVDs and used a thin black texter to fill in the interview details on the shiny round surfaces before slotting each one into the recording device at the end of the table with a click. An image of Joseph appeared on the device's screen, the small version of him rolling his eyes in disgust. This was not going to be fun. Charlotte leant forward. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to go through everything on tape. J.D. will handle the bulk of that, but I'll be in here as his corroborator. That's policy. This is your chance to tell us your version of events, your opportunity to get your head out of the noose. Do you understand?" Joseph raised his bloodshot eyes from the table, really looking at her for the first time since she had come into the room. He gave a small nod, a look of resignation replacing the sneer on his lined face. "Let's just do it. I want to go home." J.D. had sat twirling a silver pen around his thumb as he'd watched the interaction between his partner and her brother. Upper management, not to mention the legal fraternity, would no doubt take her to task over this down the track, but the reality was, Charlotte had been the lead detective on the case from day one. She had to be in there. The conflict of interest could go to hell, or be dealt with later. J.D. unstrapped his orange Garmin analog watch and placed it on the scuffed desk between them, then raised his eyebrows at her. Charlotte nodded for him to begin. Depressing the bright red record button, J.D. checked the image, and the interview commenced. "This is a DVD recorded interview between Detective John Darkin and Father Joseph Callahan, conducted at the Gull Bay Police Station." Charlotte had heard the preamble a million times, but this time it struck her like a slap in the face. Joseph, her brother, the person she admired most in life, was sitting opposite her, about to be grilled as a suspect for some of the most heinous crimes she had ever dealt with. Here he was, being cautioned and read his rights. It took all her restraint not to shove the recording unit to the ground, grab her brother by the hand, and make a mad dash for the hills. If she could have, she would have. "Do you agree the time by my watch is now 2:35 p.m? J.D.'s soothing voice dragged Charlotte back to reality. Joseph leant forward and peered at the watch in J.D.'s outstretched hand before nodding. "By your watch? Yes, Detective Darkin. That is the time." Charlotte winced at the sarcasm lacing Joseph's words. Looks like it was going to be one of those interviews. She knew that wouldn't help anyone, least of all her brother. J.D. continued rolling through the introductory portion of the interview, confirming the details of everyone present and ensuring Joseph understood his caution and rights, Joseph confirmed that he did not wish to contact a solicitor as he believed he had done nothing wrong, and Charlotte bit at the thumbnail of her left hand nervously, feeling a section give way between her teeth. "Father Callahan," J.D. said, leaving the scripted opening behind. "Firstly, some background on how you came to be here. Do you agree that you were arrested earlier today by my partner, Detective Charlotte Callahan, in relation to the recent murder of Alice Tremonti?" Joseph pursed his lips and gave a nod that seethed with irritation. "Is that a yes for the recording?" "Yes," Joseph said curtly. His eyes locked on J.D. "My sister, Detective Charlotte Callahan, you mean? Don't forget that part, Detective Darkin. It's very important. Oh, and I was arrested at work. Don't leave that out either." Charlotte felt her face redden, and she cleared her throat as she scribbled over and over an infinity sign she had drawn on the bare page of her daybook. "Is it fair to say you were handcuffed and brought directly here to this police station?" J.D. continued, glossing over Joseph's facetious tone. "Where you were placed in this interview room pending the commencement of this interview? Is that correct?" "It is." "Okay, Father. Let's get down to it, shall we? Obviously, we need to speak to you in connection with not just the attack on and murder of Miss Tremonti, but also regarding the recent deaths of 2 other women in the area. That's a lot of ground to cover. Can you confirm you are one of our local priests?" "No comment." Charlotte's eyes shot up from her notes. Joseph was glaring straight at her. "Father Callahan, I'm just trying to establish who you are in the community for the purpose of the tape," J.D. said. "I think you would agree everyone who lives in this town would be aware of your vocation. Can you simply confirm that for the recording?" Joseph's steely gaze didn't shift. His eyebrows knitted, jaw set. "No comment." Charlotte tossed her pen down on the table, where it skittered across the polished surface before teetering on the edge and falling to the filthy carpet. "Don't be a fool, Joe," she said. "This is your chance, possibly your only chance, to refute the evidence. Yes, the law affords you the right to remain silent, but really? After what I found in your car? You need to tell us your story, please." Joseph exhaled, rubbing his stubbled chin on his left shoulder, the scraping sound breaking the awkward silence, but he didn't respond. "Are you going to answer all my questions with no comment, Father?" J.D. said. "No comment," Joseph replied, glaring across the table. "That's your right," J.D. continued, shrugging his shoulders at Charlotte. "But understand that I'm still required to put the allegations to you, and—" "This is bullshit!" Charlotte burst out, slamming her fists down on the table. "Just tell me how that girl's purse ended up in your car if you had nothing whatsoever to do with it, Joseph. Please! You're my brother. I want to believe you, but if you go down this path, it makes that more difficult. And if I can't have faith in you, how the hell do you expect anyone else to?" It was as if the word faith lit a fire in her brother's soul. He rose from the table, fists clenched by his side, face white with anger. "If you need me to talk, to have faith in me, you're more of a disappointment than I thought," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Don't you dare lecture me about faith." He spat the words out, flecks of spit gathered in the corners of his mouth. "Now, let me say it once more. No comment." J.D. motioned for Joseph to sit down, and he complied, but his anger was still clearly bubbling just below the surface. Charlotte slumped back in her chair, defeated. She knew what this meant. She knew how the rumours would start, how Joseph would be crucified in the court of public opinion, especially in a small town such as theirs. His reputation might help, but that would only bide him a small amount of time. As the pressure mounted, so would the doubt in the community, and regardless of the outcome at any trial, some mud would inevitably stick. She could only imagine the rippling implications on her extended family, especially their parents. Not native Gull Bay residents, their mum and Charlotte's dad lived an hour away on the other side of Westvale, but still visited regularly. Then there was the long-lasting, destructive effect this would have on her own relationship with Joseph. Without warning, a crystal-clear memory took shape in her mind. She and Joseph had been skateboarding on the asphalt roadway, despite their mother having warned them to stay on the footpath. Showing off to the teenage brother she adored, 6-year-old Charlotte had gained too much speed and tumbled to the ground in a blur of arms and legs. The impact had grazed her knee, the wild velocity combined with the jagged surface tearing the skin, drawing blood. It was Joe who had been there to carry her inside to safety. She recalled how he'd bandaged her up, reassured her that she would be okay, wiped the tears from her cheeks. Charlotte's heart pounded louder inside her chest with every passing minute, with every question that was asked of Joe and avoided. Surely he could hear it, straining through her ribcage. Despite the maelstrom swirling inside her head, she sat, externally reserved, as J.D. ploughed through the allegations over Alice's death, before arriving at the circumstances surrounding the other 2 victims. Still, Joseph's answers remained the same. Choking down the lump in her throat, Charlotte willed herself to not make a mockery of things by breaking down in the interview, spilling her tears on tape for all to see. Taking some solace from the fact she wasn't the one running the show, she blinked the emerging tears away, as subtly as she could. She could handle the violated and damaged bodies, the haunting death messages to unsuspecting families, even the necessity to draw her gun and potentially take a life. That was all part of what she had signed up for. But having to investigate a member of her family tore at her insides and scratched at the very essence of her being. Funnily enough, from the moment she had joined the force, much to the angst of their parents, who didn't see it as a job for a woman, Joseph had been her staunchest supporter, guiding her around the landmines he knew she would have to navigate, living in the same neighborhood that she would be forced to police. He had experienced similar difficulties early on in the priesthood, but was now fully ensconced in his parish and thriving in the community. He had been a pillar she had taken inspiration from. As the interview finally came to a close, J.D. turned to her, gnawing on his lower lip. "Anything else, Detective?" he asked, tossing out a lifeline. Charlotte paused, taking in her brother, who had barely moved throughout the questioning. He stared back, eyebrows raised. Clearing her throat, she took her last chance. "I'm just wondering, before the interview concludes, if there is anything you would like to say, Joseph, even something simple, like where you were last night." A burning sensation engulfed her eyes, her chest, her throat. Joseph remained resolute, a 1,000-yard stare boring through the wall. "Okay then," J.D. began, before he was interrupted by Joseph's quivering voice. "I was at home, preparing the homily for this weekend's Mass. That's my job, remember? I live in this community. I serve this community, and nobody loves this community more than me. I want this bastard caught as much as you do. I didn't kill that girl. How could you believe I could do that, Charlotte? My life is dedicated to serving God and His flock here on earth. I could never harm one of them. Those things you found in my car were put there by someone else, maybe to set me up. You know my car is always unlocked. Heck, the door to my house is always unlocked, and most people in this town know that. As for the deaths of the other 2 girls, I believe I have alibis for both of those dates as well. A little digging by you can confirm that. So investigate away. I have nothing to hide. Just get it done quickly and move on to finding the real killer, because he is out there, living among us, and that makes my skin crawl." "This interview is now concluded." Charlotte reached across and depressed the red stop button, bringing things to an abrupt end. She'd heard enough. Chapter 21. Approximately 77 minutes later, after finally, albeit begrudgingly, providing further details of his whereabouts at the time of the murders, Father Joseph Callahan walked out the front door of the police station. He was a temporarily free man, courtesy of the local bail justice, who just happened to be a long-time parishioner. Not that he would ever admit that that had had any bearing on his decision. The minute he left, Charlotte seized her opportunity to debrief J.D. She stirred the 2 coffees she had just poured. "I know I'm probably not meant to say this, but what an idiot." "I have to agree," J.D. said, stifling a yawn. "That was his chance. I can't believe he wouldn't take it. He's lucky he added that bit at the end. At least that gives us something to work with. To be honest, if it was anyone else, I reckon they'd still be in a cell, not on their way home. Sometimes who you know gets you a long way, particularly in a town like this one." "But you have to admit he seemed pretty confident in his alibis. How solid they turn out to be remains to be seen, but let's look into them. At the time of the first murder, he says he was at a parishioner's house for most of the evening, after the mother of the house died suddenly of a heart attack. It only takes a discreet phone call to validate that one. As for the night of the second murder, he says he and a fellow priest from a nearby diocese were present at a parish finance committee meeting, which lasted several hours. Again, fairly easy to substantiate, though the time frame doesn't cover the whole night. Given there's no CCTV at the parish, I don't think we can definitively rule him in or out there. But we can confirm whether the meeting itself took place, although part of it would need to be verified by another priest, which raises questions in itself. His alibis aren't ironclad. Alibis rarely are. But it isn't like he's telling us that each time he was home on the couch alone watching reruns of Sons of Anarchy. "True," J.D. said. "But that's only for the first 2. He was home alone for the last one, and he had no real explanation for the rope and purse, which were found in his car." "Yes, I'm aware of that, J.D. I was the one who found them, remember? And I was the one who arrested him, which I won't forget in a hurry. But you aren't seriously suggesting that he killed the 3rd girl but not the 1st and 2nd? He isn't a copycat killer. Either he's done them all or he's innocent." "I agree, but the evidence was in his car, Charlotte. As well as the fact that the families of all 3 victims have direct connections with Joseph's church. I'm not saying it's an open and shut case, but right now, he's our main suspect, and until someone else rears their head, he has to remain our focus. There's no way around it." Charlotte sipped the scalding coffee, its heat permeating the porcelain mug and settling in the palms of her hands. The facts were impossible to ignore. But there was an explanation hidden somewhere. There just had to be. Her mind was locked in a battle between the brother she knew and loved and the animal who preyed on innocent women, and the weight of the truth crushed her shoulders. "I see where you're coming from, but J.D., he's a priest. And maybe to some people that condemns him further, but I disagree. The only plausible explanation I can see is that someone has tried to set him up." J.D. raised his eyebrows. "Plausible? There's no way you would believe that coming from anyone else, the old someone planted it there excuse. Come off it, Charlotte. Where's the motive? Look, we've been doing this job long enough to know that anything's possible. But doesn't it make more sense to follow where the clues are leading us? I know he's your brother, but are you sure you've considered the possibility that he actually is the killer?" "Hang on a second," Charlotte said incredulously. "You really think Joseph fits this killer's profile? That my brother has the depravity necessary to slaughter innocent women? You've got to be kidding me, J.D. And not only that, you're arguing that he's clever enough not to leave any DNA, hair, fingerprints, or anything else at the crime scenes, but then he just leaves the rope and the victim's purse sitting in his unlocked car, waiting to be found. That makes no sense." "Okay, you have a point. But everyone makes mistakes, Charles. All I'm saying is your brother has a bit of work to do to get himself out of this one. And with the media heat we're going to have, the bosses are going to want an arrest sooner rather than later." "What about the link with the gym? Charlotte asked, more in hope than confidence. JD nodded. Yeah, it's a link, and I'm already looking into it. I've reached out to the owner, and we've got an appointment to see him tomorrow morning. Apparently he's away at a health and fitness conference in Westvale and doesn't get back until late tonight. I deliberately kept the details of our inquiry vague, just until we get a bit of a read on him. But bear in mind that in a boring town like this one, being a member of the local gymnasium is hardly unexpected and might not be the link we're hoping for. Charlotte shrugged and closed her eyes. He could be right, but he could also be horribly wrong. And right now, they needed to examine every theory that came their way. Convince her partner, and more importantly Dash, that the items found in her brother's possession weren't his, and he might have an escape. Better still, produce someone who had motive to set him up. Charlotte Callahan? Charlotte opened her eyes at the unfamiliar voice. Spinning in her chair, she was confronted by a bouquet of flowers on legs and a pudgy hand attempting to wave from one side of the orange box that housed all manner of cuttings displayed like a peacock's plumage. A head appeared between the taller stalks. Delivery for Charlotte Callahan? Yes, that's me, Charlotte said, feeling her cheeks flush as she rose from her chair. But I'm not sure. These are yours then, the delivery guy said, shoving the box towards her, keen to pass it on. Looks like you've made an impression. That's the biggest bunch we had in the shop, and the most expensive. But I never told you that. Mumbling a thank you, Charlotte accepted the bundle and managed to make enough room on her desk before she dropped it. Not exactly a flower girl, she couldn't help but be impressed by the mass of blooms, dominated by a number of rainbow tulips and flawless roses, dappled with glistening water droplets. She reached for the card, unable to suppress a smile. Wow, JD said, smirking. Don't tell me you've finally found someone who can put up with you. You do, Charlotte shot back, grinning as her fingers worked the envelope. I've got no choice. Believe me, I've tried. If you ask me, I'm the one who should be rewarded for putting up with you. Charlotte flicked open the card, but she'd known who the flowers were from the moment she laid eyes on them. There was only one person she knew who would make a gesture this grand, and the handwriting confirmed it. Dear Charlotte, no reason, just because they're as gorgeous as you are. Jack. Beaming, Charlotte folded the card and tucked it into the hip pocket of her pants, safe and sound. So, who is the poor sap? JD asked. But Charlotte just smiled. The flowers were there for all to see, but the details of the sender were hers alone. She took a few seconds to bury her face in the bouquet and breathe in the intoxicating fragrance. That was something she needed to do a little more often. Okay, JD, she said. I think it's time we paid the Motivation Factory a little visit. Chapter 22. Early the next morning, as JD pulled into the modest car park at the rear of the gym, Charlotte flicked through her daybook, refreshing in her mind the details of the case so far. Sunlight speared through the wispy clouds that hung overhead that would soon disintegrate into nothing, like a mouthful of fairy floss. Clicking the end of her pen in and out, Charlotte rubbed at her forehead, scrunching the skin. 3 deceased females, every one of them a member of this gym. Was that really the link? Either way, they had to justify or discount the theory, or at least take some steps in the right direction. Police Work 101, pound the pavement and talk to the people. Let's do this, JD said, sliding his sunglasses onto the top of his head before opening the driver's door. I've arranged for the owner to meet us here. With a bit of luck, he can give us all the details we need without any talk of warrants. Charlotte got out of the car and stretched until it felt like her shoulder blades had folded back on themselves, as if she'd sprouted angel wings. I won't be holding my breath. In the warming air, a hum of sound escaped the gym and rumbled across the car park towards them. Gotta love Aretha. That's the Queen of Soul right there. JD grooved his way across the asphalt towards the sliding door entry. his praying mantis arms revolving around his rotating hips in classic, embarrassing white man dance moves. Charlotte shook her head in disgust, but couldn't stop a smile edging its way onto her face. "You idiot," she said, giving him some room. "It's the Weather Girls, anyway." JD stopped mid-spin, his suit jacket flapping back down against his body. "Really? I could have sworn it was 80s disco, my man. Don't doubt me." She swanned past him, activated the sliding doors, and they were greeted by a wave of air-conditioned coolness. The gym was roughly half full, an aerobics class taking place front and centre, while men and women of all ages and sizes, she was pleasantly surprised to see, clanged and grunted their way through routines around the edges, sweat and silver flashing in equal parts. Music belted out of several speakers dotted around the complex, despite the fact that most people were using their own earphones.
"You must be the detectives."
They both angled towards the voice, matching it to the man who was striding over to them, his bulky arm outstretched.
"Corey Garcelle. I'm the owner."
As if the Motivation Factory clothing and visor didn't give that away, Charlotte thought. At least in his late 40s, judging by the wrinkles that framed his weathered face. Garcelle was the epitome of fitness. Wearing a purple shoestring singlet, the type that Charlotte despised, he was bulging, his biceps rippled, and the veins that crisscrossed the skin reminded her of the Underground Railway map she had studied on holiday in London years ago. His hair was slate grey and furry, as if someone had skinned a rabbit and tossed the remains onto his scalp. His eyes a vivid blue. He wasn't an altogether unattractive man, but certainly not Charlotte's cup of tea at all. "Detectives Callahan and Darkin," she said, wincing as Garcelle squeezed her hand in greeting.
"Callahan? You mean like Dirty Harry?" he said. "That's funny. Go ahead. Make my day. Sudden Impact 1982. I love that movie."
"It was 1983, and I have a G. He didn't," Charlotte replied. Garcelle ignored her, clearly more used to being surrounded by yes-men, and he stepped back and gestured towards his office. A glass cube, shoved in the back corner of the building and raised on stilts, his office overlooked the entire area and would have been more at home in a warehouse than a gym.
"Ah, that's better,"
he said as the three of them entered. The sound outside had deadened abruptly as he closed the door, and Charlotte had the vague sense she'd just been dropped underwater.
"Best noise-cancelling glass money can buy, and worth every cent. Have a seat, please."
The words Motivation Factory were plastered in every direction Charlotte looked. Drink bottles, towels, posters, even the chairs had the logo embroidered across their backs. It was clear a decent amount of money had been invested into this place. Garcelle was either in it for the long haul, or stupid, or both. At the moment, Charlotte was leaning towards the latter. Shuffling in her seat, her firearm digging into her hip bone, she waited for JD to kick off proceedings.
"So, how can I help you guys?"
Garcelle said before JD had a chance, pyramiding his hands under his chin.
"If it's something to do with one of our members, I need to let you know I take the privacy of my clients very seriously. Of course, if it's a membership for yourselves you're after, then I'm more than happy to accommodate you."
Charlotte fought not to roll her eyes. This bloke was a walking cliché.
"We're here in relation to a murder investigation,"
JD said, slicing through the small talk.
3 murders to be exact, all with a link to this gym.
Garcelle kept the same charming smile plastered on his face, but Charlotte could tell he was buzzing underneath. Why, she hadn't figured out yet.
"Ah, yes. I heard about that on the news, obviously. You'd have to be living under a rock not to. Terrible. Absolutely terrible."
He shook his head.
"I knew the first girl was a member here. Carly Dalgleish, wasn't it? I didn't know the other 2 were as well. Gee, that's not great for business."
"Christy," Charlotte said, taking note of the way he restlessly spun his wedding band around his finger, boasting, or can't wait to remove it. "Christy Dalgleish, And I'd say the state of your business is the last thing on the minds of the families of those young women, or the killers, for that matter."
"Oh, I didn't mean it like that. It's just—"
Charlotte shut him down with a wave of her hand. "From what we know, the three girls weren't friends. Most likely didn't even know each other. You have CCTV footage in here?" Garcelle nodded.
"Yes, but only at the entrance. The one you guys came in. And there's a camera in this office above the safe, just in case. But there's no coverage of the floor at all. We're going to need you to check your systems for the last few times these three young women visited," JD said, handing across the victims' names on a torn sheet of paper. "Anything out of the ordinary, you let us know. Strange people, anyone who looks like they're following one of them. I take it you have a photo of each of them from their ID cards?" "Yes, we do. Saved on the system, along with the exact time and date they scanned in." Garcelle ran his finger down JD's handwritten list as he spoke. "This shouldn't be a problem. I'll get back to you by the end of the day, let you know how I went. Our system's pretty efficient." "Excellent. Now, I understand your privacy concerns, but is there anyone you've had issues with who it might be worth us looking at? Anyone hanging around who shouldn't be? Someone banned from the centre?" Garcelle paused in thought, his brow furrowed, lips pursed. "Not that I can think of. We're a relatively new business, and everything's been running smoothly since we opened. I have to say, this line of inquiry surprises me. The whole thing feels like a coincidence. We're the only gym of this type in town, so it makes sense the girls would come here. If you care about your health and live in Gull Bay, this is where you're going to go to work out. But hey, you're the detectives." "That's right." Charlotte's hackles tingled as she rose from her chair. "Thanks for your time, Mr. Garcelle. We appreciate it. I know you're a busy man, but please, get back to us about the footage as soon as you can. It could be very important." "Oh, for sure," Garcelle said, rushing to the door to see them out. "I'll ask a few of the regulars too, discreetly, of course, see if they know anything. I'm always happy to help." He winked at Charlotte as she passed, as if they had a shared secret, something they were withholding from JD. She ignored him, angered at the slight flush that came to her cheeks. As the sliding doors peeled back to return them to the rising heat, Charlotte shaded her eyes from the sun, getting her bearings on where the car was parked. JD strode off ahead of her. It was then she felt a tug on her sleeve. Are you the police?" Turning, she saw a middle-aged woman clad in bike shorts and a halter top, a pink water bottle clutched in her hand, face tomato red. Her blonde hair was bundled on top of her head, sprouting up like a seedling. Yes, we are. I'm Detective Callahan." The woman glanced back at the sliding doors, as if fearful she was being watched. Then she leant in, whispering so close Charlotte could smell the sweat on her body. "If you're here about the dead girls? I knew Christy and Janice, only from workouts, but occasionally we had the odd coffee afterwards. Not serious friends or anything like that. But they were gorgeous and didn't deserve what happened to them. I'll just say this, and you didn't hear it from me, okay? That guy you were speaking to, the manager, Corey, us girls call him the octopus. He's way more touchy-feely than he should be. It's gross. I'm not saying he had anything to do with what's happened, but I wouldn't trust him as far as I could kick him. Do you mind if we—" But before Charlotte could finish her question, the woman had spun on her heel, hand held up in refusal, and was marching off back inside. Charlotte stared as the doors sealed shut, bemused. "What was all that about?" JD asked when she'd made her way to the car. "You know her?" "Nope," Charlotte said. "But she knows our man Corey Garcelle, and it seems he wanted to know some of the girls in there a little better than he should. We'll need to keep an eye on him." She slapped the visor down to ward off the rising sun, and as they exited the car park, Charlotte stared at the silver-tinted gymnasium windows. Were they designed to protect or conceal? Chapter 23. "What'll it be tonight? Rare or medium rare?" Jack stood with his left hand on his hip, the fingers of his other hand clutching the Barbie mate. He looked across at her, his raised eyebrows arching above the frames of his sunglasses in anticipation of her response. Charlotte shuffled back under the shade of the umbrella,
the outdoor chair scraping against the pavers. A grin broke across her face. Jack was clothed in a Superman apron and shorts, and nothing else. Even though the delightful evening lent itself to that type of attire, she wasn't used to seeing him with his shirt off, and the sight made her blush. "Rare, like a good man," she replied, raising her glass in Jack's direction and winking. The flesh of the steak seared as he flipped it. Charlotte could see flames licking at the underside of the grill from where she sat, but she remained confident Jack knew what he was doing. He was one of those guys who could turn his hand to pretty much anything and give it a fair crack. Besides, couldn't every Aussie man worth his salt find his way around a barbecue? Sunlight glinted off the glass salad bowl that sat in the middle of the outdoor table, and Charlotte scooped out a handful of the fresh produce while Jack's attention was on the grill. It was her favourite salad, a perfect mixture of crisp fried noodles, wombok, pine nuts, and a drizzled dressing that she could have drowned in. It was so good. If Jack nailed the steak, it would be the perfect end to what had been another long day. Duties complete, Jack discarded his apron and took a seat opposite her. Beads of sweat running down his neck as he flopped into the chair and brought a moist stubby of Carlton Draft to his lips, an image of perspiring perfection. "You better enjoy that," he said, nodding at the meal as he wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "I reckon I've lost 5 kilos cooking it. Can you tell?" Charlotte laughed as he patted his toned stomach. She watched as he sat forward and sliced every inch of fat from the edges of his serving, banishing them to one side of his plate. In contrast, she needed every ounce of protein and fat she could get, and so hacked into her steak with gusto, each bite of the red meat recharging her ailing body. "Yeah, you're almost wasting away to nothing," she said, grinning. "You need to get to a gym, my friend, and fast. Hey, speaking of which, can I ask you something work-related?" "Of course," Jack said. Charlotte could see him perk up, as usual. Any mention of her work always excited him. He loved an opportunity to prove he could solve a crime or decipher the clues. Oddly, she found it incredibly cute, and couldn't deny that seeing him so engaged turned her on, both towards him and her work. She bit her lower lip as she felt her pulse quicken. "It's actually as much about your work as mine. You know that new 24-hour gym we talked about? The Motivation Factory?" Jack nodded, his sunglasses now perched on top of his head as he chewed on a mouthful of steak, brows furrowed, eyes soft. "I don't want to say too much, but we had cause to go there and speak to the owner about our victims, to check for CCTV and that sort of thing." "You spoke to Corey then?" Jack said as he spooned the noodle salad onto his plate. "Yeah, we did," Charlotte said. "He was semi-helpful. He said he's going to check on a few things for us that we need. You've met him then? I guess what I really want to know is what your take on him is." Placing his cutlery down on his plate, Jack looked thoughtful. "Why do you ask? He's not a suspect, is he?" "Shit, no," Charlotte answered, quick to douse that fire before it flared. "We've heard some stories and I wondered what you thought, that's all." "Well, that's good. I don't like selling cars to crooks if I can help it," Jack said, relaxing back into his chair. "He's been in the dealership looking to buy a couple of Suzuki Vitaras to use as promotional vehicles for the gym. He hasn't ordered anything yet, but I think he's keen. I've probably met him 2 or 3 times. He's a bit full-on for my liking, but that's not unusual for a fitness freak. He's a close talker too, one of those blokes who gets right up in your face, you know? But he's okay in small doses, I suppose. And if he buys a couple of cars off me, I'll like him even more." Charlotte sipped her wine. "And his clients, the women in particular, any common reason why they left him and came to you? Apart from the obvious?" She glanced slyly at his bare chest. Jack flashed a grin, lacing his hands behind his head and striking his best Calvin Klein pose. "I've got no idea what you mean." A laugh bubbled out of Charlotte, and she tossed the salt shaker at him, satisfied when it thumped into his chest. "Don't be a wanker. Just answer." "Well, aside from the better views, There were a couple of girls who said they were a bit creeped out by him.
Creeped out? How so?
Just his vibe, I think. A little bit too hands-on, maybe? Nothing specific, but I got the impression maybe he asked a few too many questions. Got a bit too personal. You want to make your clients feel special, and like they're your focus when you're with them, but it's a fine line. And it sounds like he might have overstepped it now and then. Actually, now that I think about it, he did try to kiss one of the girls, but she put a stop to it pretty quickly. She said he was apologetic and probably just misread the situation. Whatever happened, he needs to be careful with that type of shit. Word travels fast in a small town.
Charlotte considered Jack's words, adding them to the file she kept in her head on Corey Garcelle, a file that was thickening by the hour. She gulped down the remainder of her wine, feeling the 2 glasses she had now drunk mixing with the anti-nausea medication she had taken earlier, giving her an unintended buzz. Or was it intended? She felt light-headed and rested her hands in her lap as she took in the surrounds, a comfortable silence falling between them. Was tonight the night? Perhaps it was the wine or the warmth, but the evening now seemed full of uninhibited possibilities. Charlotte's reverie was disturbed as a magpie landed on the back of the vacant chair next to her and cawed at her hungrily, its red eye glistening as it stared her down. She withdrew a spiraled noodle from the bowl and held it out, beckoning the bird closer. Its wings fluttered with indecision, risk versus reward causing it to falter. Desperate to eat but still aware of the absolute danger. Warbling, it took the plunge, swooping in and snatching the food before flapping away to perch on the towering side fence. Charlotte's gaze returned to Jack. They were alone, and the night was still. The potent chemical cocktail in her system held her rational thoughts prisoner, hijacking her common sense and heightening her desire. Unable to take her eyes from his, she could feel the electricity zapping between them, sense her skin flushing in response to his stare. She rose from her seat and walked to the half-open glass sliding door into the house. One glance back over her shoulder was all Jack needed. In a flash he was behind her, his body pressing against her as they stepped in tandem through the opening. In the kitchen, Charlotte spun and leant against the bench as her hands desperately sought him out. Any part of him, she simply craved the contact. There were no words, only the sound of their bodies colliding. Her head was spinning, the world tilting. She wrapped her arms around him, his lips on hers. Jack's hands ran down her back, exploring, her own hands on his bare muscular chest. He kissed her neck, then nibbled on her earlobe. She heard herself moan, an out-of-body expression of pleasure that she never wanted to end. Jack unbuttoned her shirt and tugged it over her head before pulling her body against him. Reaching behind her, he clumsily unclasped her bra and allowed it to fall to the floor. Taking a step back, he stopped to admire her, his liquid eyes dark with desire. Despite her own need, Charlotte felt embarrassment swell as she stood semi-naked before him, and her arm snaked its way up her body to cover her breasts. It was always this way for her when it came to sex, desire waging a constant battle against shyness, give and take, show and conceal, enjoyment and remorse. Now, though, her illness too was pitted against her need for love and human contact. As her hands moved to conceal her breasts, her fingers brushed her nipple, and a gasp escaped her mouth. Jack let out a groan and stepped back into her. His hands were around her slim waist, and he hoisted her onto the bench, spreading her legs and positioning himself between them as his tongue explored her mouth. She pressed against him, legs wrapped around his body, feet crossed at the small of his back, pressing him back into her. Their bodies moved together, grinding against one another, deep murmurs escaping them both. Charlotte knew Jack was enjoying this every bit as much as she was. She could feel it. Arching her back, she flung her head away from him for a second, desperate to catch her breath, her head buzzing, her inhibitions eroding away. She felt like she was about to explode, her arms propped behind her and Jack's head buried in her chest. Charlotte glanced down at him, opening her eyes for the first time in what seemed like forever. And then it happened. She saw herself in that moment of time, every inch of her shuddering body, locked in an embrace with her lover. As Jack kissed his way down her tummy, his fingers fumbling at the button of her shorts, she caught a glimpse of the small dotted scar that ran down the outside curve of her left breast, a thin white line, barely even visible. That was all it took. Like a bucket of Arctic water to the face, her mind cleared and her senses returned, flooding her brain. What the fuck am I doing? No! Stop! I can't! It took all of her mental strength to push Jack away, secure her pants, and slide off the bench. The sight of the scar had brought home to her all that she still kept hidden from the man she was falling for. Jack had obviously skimmed over it in his haste to please her, but as the fog lifted from her pheromone-addled brain, she realized that her physical scars were only the tip of the iceberg. Though her mind had stopped spinning, her legs still trembled as Charlotte clutched at the crook of her left arm to conceal the puncture mark and residual bruise from her last bout of chemo. Something else she had always been careful to cover up. Not to mention the wig. How the hell could she have hidden that if they'd ended up in the bedroom? Without it, she was a freak show, a bald shadow of a human being. Is that what she wanted Jack to see? How she wanted him to perceive her? Bathing in the afterglow of their love, rolling over only to discover her with a crooked wig concealing a barren scalp? She couldn't deal with that. Not now. Maybe not ever. "I'm sorry, did I do something wrong?" Jack said, his hands raised in surrender. One eyebrow cocked, he gazed at Charlotte, his expression concerned. "I thought you were enjoying it. I'm sorry if I misread something." "No, I was, believe me." Charlotte slid her chambray shirt back over her head, flustered. Look, it's not your fault, and it's not what you think. Now is just not the right time. Not because I don't want to. It's because, well, it's just because. There was an awkward silence as Jack bent down and picked up a tea towel from where it had fallen on the floor. He folded it neatly and placed it back on the bench. Charlotte embraced him, but their bodies, which only minutes before had been melded into one, were now an awkward jumble. "I could finish you off if you like." She ran her fingers across the front of his shorts, kissing his cheek gently. Surely she couldn't mess that up. "I'm fine," Jack said, his voice low. "Really, I'm fine. Look, it's probably best if I left." He collected his belongings from the bench, tossing his T-shirt over his shoulder. On his way to the door, he placed one hand on the side of Charlotte's head and kissed her hair. "I'll call you," Charlotte said, barely able to lift her eyes from the floor. Shame was a heavy burden. "Not if I call you first," Jack replied before closing the door behind him. She heard his car engine roar to life in the driveway and listened as the noise faded into the distance. Warm, salty tears streaming down her face. Chapter 24. Another Sunday, 1987. Why did a week at school go so fast, especially in summer? I had grown to hate Sunday mornings, but after what felt like no time, there I was again, entering the front door of the church half an hour before everyone else. That was the lot of an altar boy, an early arrival and a late finish at every service. I walked down the central aisle, the large painting of the crucifix glaring down at me from above the altar. That painting always freaked me out. Everywhere I went, the eyes of Jesus were looking at me, watching my every movement. I wondered if Father felt the same way when he looked at that picture. If it made me feel bad for things I'd done, like not taking out the garbage or forgetting to make my bed. Did it make Father feel bad for the things he did? I guess he just didn't bother looking at it. "Hey, mate." Ben was waving to me from the corridor that led down to the priest's rooms at the back of the church. He was still in his normal clothes, like me, which meant that I wasn't late, which was a relief. Father didn't like us being late. Yet another thing that made him angry. "Hi," I said, my voice echoing in the empty chamber of the church. I jogged over to him, my sneakers squeaking on the wooden floor before being muffled by the carpet. "How are you?" "I'm okay. I was getting worried. Thought you were going to be late, or that I was going to be here by myself." "I wouldn't do that to you," I said, patting him on the shoulder. We both knew that being the only one here was the worst possible scenario.
"Morning, boys," Father's deep voice boomed down the corridor. "Come on down. Every minute is precious, you know."
He was standing at the doorway to his room, motioning us towards him with a beckoning hand. We dragged our feet down the corridor. Ben just in front of me, walking as slowly as he could.
"Spark up, boys,"
Father said, pressing himself back on the door frame to allow us to pass. There wasn't really enough room for us to squeeze by. It nearly made me sick. It was the same story most weeks. Father would stand there exactly as he was now, watching us as we got our robes ready. The other priest just stayed in the corner, not saying a word.
"Now, boys, God admires children who can do what they are told without question. That is called obeying. And that's what God wants of all of us," Father said as he slipped his own ceremonial gown over his head. "Now, before we start getting everything ready, there's something we need to discuss."
Chapter 25. For Father Joseph Callahan, there was no option but for life to continue on. He was still a priest. He still had a parish full of people looking to him for guidance, and he still believed he had the ability and experience to chart them on a course to a better life. The events of the previous day had shaken him, but his faith remained intact. He looked at it from a spiritual perspective, seeing it in much the same light as the manner in which Jesus himself had been tested when he walked among his people on earth. Was he scared of what might lie ahead? Of course. He was a man, after all. And while his relationship with God might allow him to handle things a little better than average, he couldn't deny the fear. The mere thought of jail time made his skin crawl. He was fortunate that his daily grind had to continue. People depended on him. And that took his mind off things, permitted him to focus on others. There were masses to prepare, parishioners to visit, church group meetings to support. Confession was also something he was required to engage in as part of his weekly duties. And it was on the agenda the evening after his arrest. Sitting inside the confessional booth with the light on, he flicked through the most recent copy of the parish's weekly newsletter, his thoughts a million miles away. The strong smell of teak sat with him, the old wood scent reassuring, taking his mind back to the hundreds of people he had counselled over the years. Although he was worried how the scandal of his arrest might affect the number of attendees at Mass, he knew most Catholics had a pretty thick skin, and he believed, or hoped, they would give him the benefit of the doubt, for the moment at least. As he sat pondering his future, the ding of the bell sounded. Someone had entered the other side of the confessional, ready to acknowledge their sins. Sitting up straight and clearing his throat, Joseph could see the outline of a man through the lattice, and he waited for him to kick things off.
"Bless me, Father, for I have sinned."
As soon as he heard the strange, rasping voice, Joseph's heart fluttered up his throat. In the flurry of everything that had happened, he had completely forgotten about the odd man who had taken off so suddenly at the last confessional. But he had returned. "How long since your last confession?" Joseph asked, following the script, trying to keep the curiosity out of his voice.
"You're a smart man, Father. I think you know the answer to that one. Or have you forgotten already?"
Joseph found himself grinning at the response. It seemed he was going to be involved in a battle of wits again. "I haven't forgotten, but I would never presume something as important as that," he said. Many people come through these doors to cleanse their sins, so I can never be certain. Well, you may recall we touched on the matter of confidentiality in the confessional. Do you remember? Clearing his throat in an automatic response to the speaker's hoarse voice, Joseph answered cautiously. You left in a hurry that night. Are you better prepared to ask for forgiveness for your troubles tonight? Prepared? The pitch of the man's voice rose slightly. I don't know about that, but I'll have a crack. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Isn't that what they say? Something like that. Joseph noticed the dark silhouette move a little closer to the perforated barrier that separated them, blocking the display of light that danced through the pattern like fairy dust. But before you start, I need to ask you a question, if I may. Go for it, the man said. He sounded surprised and the smirk was clear in his voice. I'm an open book. A few days ago, I had a visitor to one of my services. He only stayed a short time during Mass before disappearing. But he didn't leave without a trace. This person left something behind, a message of sorts that was placed alight on the church steps. I don't suppose you know anything about that? Joseph was met with silence, the man apparently considering the implications of what had been told before answering. You say it was left alight? He said almost mockingly. You mean burning? Yes, burning, Joseph answered, feeling his anger rise. The memory of the smell searing his nostrils. The mix of flame and feces was not something he was likely to forget in a hurry. He sniffed. A flaming package of excrement left on the steps of this building. Absolutely disgusting, not to mention dangerous. I had 40 or 50 parishioners trying to leave at the time. Men, women, children, churchgoers just trying to enjoy their day. It's unacceptable, as if this community hasn't suffered enough. Indeed, it is unacceptable, the man said. But it seems someone was sending you a pretty clear message, Father. It would seem someone isn't happy with your work. The church has lots of enemies, doesn't it? Even in a small town like this shithole. But it had nothing to do with me. Joseph exhaled, frustrated. The church had no enemies. Maybe the odd atheist who would rant and rave, trying to engage him in a theological debate in the main street once in a blue moon, but nobody who was capable of something like that. Lacking proof, he had to accept this man's denial, but not without suspicion, and plenty of it. Okay. Let's get back to why you're here then, shall we? As I said, you can talk about anything in here. My lips are sealed. This is your chance to be honest without any recriminations, in this world anyway. Of course, your lips are sealed, Father. Of course. But I guess we'll see about that, won't we? Well, where to start then? I may as well drop the biggest bombshell first, I suppose. No point beating about the bush. So, how shall I put this? You know those girls who've been murdered? I see you've been accused of having something to do with that. Well, let's just say I know you had nothing to do with it. You're an innocent man, Father. Well, innocent of those accusations anyway. Joseph's heart jumped in his chest, his pulse quickening. Was this some sort of joke, or did this guy really have evidence that would get him off the hook? He rubbed his hands together, perspiration seeping from his pores. That's great news, but it's probably something more appropriate for the police, not the confessional. When we're done here, I urge you to head straight to the authorities and tell them whatever it is you know. That is your responsibility. It's the right thing to do. He paused, excited by the news that someone could help him out of this mess. But he still had a job to do. What I'm interested in, however, is how that fits in with you and your failing in the eyes of God. Refusing to provide information that could help the police catch a murderer is not ideal, but it's easily fixed and isn't the greatest of sins. The man let out a sharp laugh.
Jeez, Father. Clearly they didn't put you in this position because of your intelligence. Do I really have to spell it out for you? Joseph was silent, unsure how to proceed. He could hear his own breathing, shallow and rapid. His fingers rubbed back and forth on the pebbled cover of the Bible he clasped, like a clairvoyant trying to draw out answers. My God, it's a struggle for you, isn't it, Chief? I know you're innocent because I did it. I killed those bitches. There you go. It's out there now, and let me tell you, I feel so much better. Now, will you absolve me of my sins, Father? Joseph sat still, stunned. A million threads of thought unwound in his head at once, clarity impossible. The man had delivered the words so matter-of-factly, like a weatherman predicting tomorrow's forecast. It will be a mild 25 degrees, sunny periods with the odd cloud or two, and I attacked and murdered 3 women in the last fortnight. He was in completely uncharted waters. Revelations like this certainly weren't the norm at confession. Sleeping with another man's wife was about the most salacious he had heard. There were so many questions assaulting his mind, he could barely keep his eyes open. This man, seated just on the other side of this thin perforated wall, was claiming to be a cold-blooded murderer. How could he prove that? Did this mean Joseph would be free of trouble with the police now? Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "What you're saying is you are responsible for 3 murders." His tongue felt twice its normal size. "About time," the man said, his voice cold and grating. "And you know what I find so fascinating? You can't do anything about it. You have to sit there and take it, to listen to everything I've got to say and then carry it with you everywhere you go. You're a priest, which means you have to keep your trap shut. You have to keep my dirty secret. Can you see the humour in that, Father? I reckon it's hilarious." Joseph's heart hammered. Could he tell the police and break the seal of confession? What would the ramifications be of such a move? Would he be excommunicated from the faith? Could he even live with himself? He knew the man was right. As much as he would love to run out into the street yelling that there was a murderer in the church, he knew he couldn't. He took his vows too seriously and could never breach the confidentiality confession provided. Still, that didn't mean he couldn't try to find another way. "My friend, I don't for one moment intend to trivialize what you're saying," Joseph said, choosing his words carefully, "but anyone could come in here and claim to have committed these murders." "Oh, you think I'm making it up?" the man said, not bothering to contain his disbelief. "It's funny how you have faith in some things without any evidence, but you won't believe me. But fair enough. Your sister's on the case, isn't she? How about you ask her about the little quotes I left with each body, which of course led straight to you. I slipped the last one behind the girl's ear. That proof enough for you, doubting Thomas?" Joseph felt his stomach drop. "Well," the man said, and Joseph could sense his impatience simmering, like a pot of water moments from boiling point. "Okay, I believe you," he said shakily. He was terrified at the thought of this sick bastard sitting in the room right next to him, but he also needed to think about his own priorities, which hinged on him steering the investigation in the right direction and clearing his name. This ends CD 4. CD 5. He sat on his hands to stop them from shaking. I think you need to consider turning yourself in to the police. This has to stop, and I think even you know that. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. You wanted someone to know so you could clear your conscience and get the advice that you already know to be the right thing to do. Talking through issues is cathartic. It allows you to get them off your chest, to feel some relief from the constrictions of that burden. That's why you're here. That's why you have chosen me. I'm happy to take on that load for you, to relieve you of it if I can. You're right. I can't tell anyone what you say to me in here,
But I can tell you what I believe you should do. And that's come clean before anyone else gets killed." Laughter reverberated around the claustrophobic rooms, and the killer began clapping slowly. "Great speech, Father. Really, well done," he said, composing himself. "Excuse me for saying so, but you're deluded. Maybe it's a god complex. What do you think?" He laughed again, his silhouette rocking back and forth in the half-light. "But you're right about one thing, Father. I chose you. It had to be you, not just any priest. Why? Well, maybe you need to have a bit of a think about your own character before you start condemning mine. But that's a whole other story. The real reason I told you was to make you suffer. I need to see you agonize over this, to watch as it tears you up inside until it snatches the very breath from your lungs, to have it gnaw away at you every minute of every day, a black cloud hovering over you, darkening your existence. That's what I want, and that's what I'll get. You're responsible for the deaths of those girls, Father, and this isn't over until I think you've suffered enough. Until then, know that these killings are your doing. Have a good think about that, won't you, during the lonely hours of your pitiful life. And don't forget the most important thing. This is our little secret." Joseph couldn't believe what he was hearing. How the hell was this his doing? This guy was insane, and Joseph was starting to feel more and more anxious about his immediate safety. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about," he managed to stammer. The metallic taste of fear was like a mouthful of coins. "Oh, but you do." The man came so close to the wall that his lips almost brushed the thin lattice. "If you only believe one thing I've said, Father, believe that. You do know. I'll say 3 words that I'm sure will jog your memory. Father Alan Watson." Now that's a blast from the past, isn't it? Joseph's head was reeling. Not only was he sitting opposite a clearly deranged killer, but he was being accused of having something to do with crimes he knew nothing about. "Okay, I think I understand," he said, trying to buy time, conscious that he needed to keep this man talking. "I get it. I've offended you in some way. I don't know how, but I'll do my best to think about that. Tell me how I can help you end this before any more innocent lives are taken. Let me know what I can do. If it's in my power to help, I will." Joseph heard the man shuffling around before his voice rasped back. "Help? Well, that's an interesting concept, Father. Isn't that what you were put on this earth to do, being a man of the cloth and all? You and all your fellow ministers? To help people?" "Yes, and I think we do that. Well, I know I do." "Of course you do. At least in your own perverted version of the world. Well, here's your chance to keep doing that good work by helping me out." Wiping his face, Joseph took a sip from the glass of cool water on the side table, feeling the liquid run all the way down his dry throat before sending icy waves through his lungs. "I'll do what I can." "No, you'll do what I say." "Within reason," Joseph said, scared of where this was heading. "I'll do what I can, but I won't break the law." "You needn't worry about that, Father," the voice came back. "You don't really have to do anything. Just talk. That's something you're good at, isn't it? All that crap you go on and on about on a Sunday, trying to tell the good people of this community how to live their lives, how to maintain their deteriorating marriages. Funny, when you think about it. What the hell would you know about that, you celibate fool? Still, that doesn't stop you dribbling out all that rubbish. I've heard it myself. It's hardly inspiring." Joseph remained glued to his seat, riding the insults, waiting for his fate to be decided. "So, here's what we're going to do. You see this?" The man pressed a mobile phone up to the barrier between them. and Joseph squinted at the bright screen, harsh in the dim light of the confessional. "In a second, I'm going to push that big red record button, and then it's showtime for you, Father. You said you wanted to help me to make the killing stop? Well, this is the only way that's going to happen, and I know you love the sound of your own voice, so I'm sure you'll be more than happy to comply with my instructions, to the very last letter. You're going to be my security blanket, Father. You're going to keep me safe. It's confession time." "Confession time?" Joseph frowned with confusion. What the hell is he talking about? I told you, I don't know what I'm supposed to have done, and even if I did, I don't know how that can help you. We'll get to that another time, but for the moment, if you want the killing to stop, you're going to confess to murdering those 3 lovely young women." "What the fuck?" Joseph shot back angrily. Fury rose inside him, hot sweat breaking out under his arms. "I will not!" Now, that's no way for a man of the cloth to speak to a member of his flock." The man's tone was so condescending, it only infuriated Joseph more. "Being a potty mouth is very unbecoming on you, Father. Your dilemma is simple. It's your choice. Make it now, and deal with the consequences later. Of course, I won't use your confession unless I have to. It'll just give me a little bit more confidence in the fact that you're going to keep my secret for me. If you spill my beans, I spill yours." "I'm sorry, but I refuse to be blackmailed by you into—" "Really? Well, I guess this is it then," the man said. "Just remember you had a chance to stop this when you see the news. And don't forget to mention it when you counsel the grieving parents, too, that you had an opportunity to save their child's life, but were too selfish to take up the offer. Oh, and one more thing. You should really learn to lock your car. Catch you later." There was a flurry of movement as the man went to leave, his silhouette moving towards the door. "Wait!" Joseph cried. Fighting his conscience with each passing second, the silhouette paused. "Just wait. Let me think for a second." The figure stood, unmoving at the door, his back still turned and his head tilted, waiting. Joseph went through his options as quickly as his cluttered mind would allow, but it was a simple equation. Not do what this man asked, and more innocent people would die, the blood of whom would be on his hands, or do what he was asked, make the confession, and hope that this sadistic killer would stick to his word and not use the recording. The choice was clear. Jesus had sacrificed himself for all mankind. Now was the moment for Father Joseph to follow his lead. "Okay, I'll do what you want, but you have to stop the killing." The man turned and walked back to his seat. "It will go like this," he said. "I'll press record, and you'll identify yourself and then make full and frank admissions to the 3 murders, a decision you have come to on your own out of pure guilt. You'll mention where each body was found, the beach boxes, the rear of the Homemaker Centre, and the parkland around the Lovers Lane car park. Do not deviate from that script. There will be no second chance. Mess this up or try anything stupid, and I will be out the door. Whatever happens from there will be on your head. Are we clear?" "Crystal." Joseph's head hung in despair. "Okay. Lights, camera, action." Looking up, Joseph saw the mobile phone held high, the red record button flashing like a time bomb, counting down his final seconds. "My name is Father Joseph Callahan," he began, hearing the tremor in his voice, muted by the confines of the confessional. "I have made a decision today, albeit with a heavy, guilty heart, to confess to the recent murders of 3 young women. This admission has been made of my own volition. The first woman—" 3 minutes later the recording was done, the confession complete. "Now, that wasn't so hard, was it?" the man said, sliding the mobile phone back into his pocket and rising from his chair. "Thank you, Father. It really has been a pleasure. Will 3 Hail Marys suffice?"
Before Joseph could reply, the silhouette disappeared from sight. The confessional door left ajar. Joseph reached for the door on his own side and threw it open. He dashed out into the main area of the church, desperate to catch at least a glimpse of the killer as he bolted, anything that he could pass on to the police. But there was nothing. That was when he felt the impact, the blinding pain, before everything went black. Chapter 26. And there we go. Gee, you're becoming a bit of an expert at this now. A beaming smile broke across the nurse's face as she patted Charlotte's shoulder. This was Charlotte's 8th bout of chemotherapy, so she should be getting used to it. And for someone who hated needles, she had to admit she was better at it now than she had been at the beginning. The key was to look away, or try to at least. The crook of her arm was so battered and bruised she looked like a druggie, but it was nothing a bit of makeup couldn't hide. That and long-sleeve tops, even in the warmer weather. Being 2 hours from home, in the anonymity of Westvale at least, allowed her to relax a little. "You okay?" the nurse asked, after checking the drip line and pushing a few buttons on the incessantly beeping machine. Charlotte nodded, lying her head back in the recliner. "As good as I can be." Chemo was one of the few times in her life when she had a chance to just stop, and for everything that cartwheeled around in her day-to-day life to be put on hold. The hour or so of treatment, as horrendous as it was, gave her the opportunity to mull things over in her own time. "Okay, your turn, Margaret." Charlotte heard the nurse turn her attention to the next poor soul in line. The chemo centre was like a sausage factory, churning out victims one after another. The waiting room was always busy, people from all walks of life waiting bald-headed for their treatment. Young, old, man, woman, black, white, rich, poor. They were easy to spot. If the sunken eyes and jaundiced skin didn't give them away, the array of bandanas and beanies certainly did. Charlotte was just one more disillusioned human being, wondering why it was they who had been selected, why their specific number had come up. She couldn't help but wonder where the fuck the cancer had even come from. She hardly ever smoked, wasn't a heavy drinker, had no family history of it. Part of her blamed the anxiety of the job, particularly her time at the homicide squad, where her stress levels had been at their highest, and severe emotional trauma was something she'd encountered on a daily basis. But she knew she was one of the lucky ones. While her body had betrayed her, her mind was still sharp. So, like most, she had no choice but to live in hope. The alternative wasn't even worth contemplating while she was still alive and kicking. She stared down at the needle in her arm, transfixed against her better judgment as the fluid slid into her system. This particular course came out of a thick black bag, and the nurse had worn protective gear when she'd hooked it up. How could something like that possibly be doing her any good? Anything someone had to wear gloves and a mask when handling probably wasn't ideal to have in her system. Medicine was amazing, frightening and terrible, but amazing all the same. She lay back, eyes closed. In her darker hours, she often thought of this moment and imagined herself as an animal at the vet, hooked up to the green dream, looking at the world for the last time. "She'll just go to sleep and won't wake up again. Don't worry, she won't be in any pain." There were times, she had to admit, where that vision held an alarming appeal. The nursing staff all knew Charlotte's occupation and were aware of her need for absolute confidentiality. Apart from her regional boss, whom she had sworn to secrecy and whose office was in Westvale, she still hadn't told anyone at work, or any family members for that matter, and she sure as hell couldn't tell Joseph now. As far as her colleagues knew, she had a friend going through it, and Charlotte was her support crew. Luckily, that explained all the days off. And it wasn't actually the day of treatment that was the worst. It was the few days or the week after when the nausea really smacked her about the head, her skin burning like it was peeling off her face. Then, of course,
there was Jack. The guilt of not telling him was growing each day, a snowball gathering in size, threatening to demolish everything that stood in its path, including the fragile town that was their relationship. It had only been one day, but she still hadn't heard from him after the other night. It was like she was back in year 10, her heartstrings straining as she waited for contact, a call, a message, anything. Her mobile buzzed on the arm of her chair, causing most of the other patients to look her way, thankful for the small distraction, and she tilted it up so she could see the screen. It was JD. "Don't tell me," she mumbled to herself, pressing the accept button and bringing the phone up to her ear. "What's up?"
"We've got a bit of a situation, Charlotte," JD said, getting right to the point. "Are you available?" She surveyed her surroundings, the absurdity of the question not lost on her. She was about as far from available as she could possibly be, and the drug was starting to make her a little drowsy. "No, I'm not," she said, concentrating hard on keeping awake, but feeling her eyelids droop. "And I probably won't be for the rest of the day either, I'm afraid. What's going on?" "Oh, shit. Okay, no worries. Leave it with me then. You stay and do whatever it is you're doing. Give me a buzz later on then, if you get a chance." Charlotte wasn't surprised by the curtness of his tone. Knowing the standards she set at work, she would have been exactly the same had the situation been reversed. But she had carried the team on her shoulders for long enough. Surely a bit of payback wasn't too much to ask. "I'm sorry, JD. I've got to do this. Tell me what's going on and I'll give you my 5 cents. "Fine," he said with a sigh. "I just thought you should know. Joseph was assaulted at the church last night. He's okay," he added quickly as Charlotte let out a gasp. "Just a bump on the head. He lost consciousness for a short time, but he's all right. He reported it this morning. Wouldn't say much other than it was a man and that he, and I quote, didn't get a good look at him. He wouldn't elaborate on how it happened or why. Maybe it was someone reacting to his arrest. Maybe the guy who left that burning turd on the church steps the other day. Who knows? Anyway, I'm going out to have a word with him and thought you might want to tag along. But that's fine. You do what you have to and I'll keep you updated with how I go. Just keep your phone handy, okay?" Charlotte shook her head, aggravated by her situation. She needed to be out there speaking to Joseph, finding out the truth about what happened. Experience had taught her that people rarely got assaulted for no reason, especially priests, and especially priests who had just been released from police custody as a suspect in a triple murder case. Clearly there was more going on than Joe was prepared to divulge. She was positive her presence could change that. "Fuck it," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet room and causing heads to swivel her way. "Sorry," she mouthed, holding her hand up in a gesture of goodwill, which did little to pacify the frowns. "I'll have my phone on me all day. Ring me when you have anything at all, okay?" She kicked her feet together in annoyance. "There's more to this than meets the eye. You know that, don't you? Tell Joe I passed on my thoughts and that I'll contact him soon. And tell him I said to tell you the whole truth, not just the bit he wants us to hear." JD laughed. "Anything else, boss? Should I have salt and pepper on my salad roll for lunch too?" "Piss off, smartass." She kept her voice down this time, but couldn't hide her grin. Trust JD to cheer her up in a situation like this. Even on her deathbed, he'd probably make her laugh. "I'm just trying to help, that's all. You worry about yourself, okay?" Yeah, okay. I'll be in touch. Oh, one more thing. I heard back from Corey Garcelle at the Motivation Factory. He's trolled through all the footage and had no luck in terms of any suspects. He's more than happy to give us a copy of the recordings, but other than your mystery woman, we might be at a bit of a dead end as far as the gym goes. I put the word out as much as I could, though. Garcelle says he'll let us know if he hears anything, and I spoke to some other members there. Let him know what we were investigating and why. Other than frightening the shit out of a few of them, I didn't achieve much. But the flyer is up on the notice board, so we might still get something. Maybe. Charlotte bit her bottom lip. I'm not prepared to write it off just yet. There's something not quite right there.
but I can't put my finger on it. Anyway, let me know how you go." After ending the call, Charlotte held the phone in her hand, tapping it against her chin as her mind fought against the effects of the drug in a vain attempt to stay lucid. Joseph was okay. That was the main thing. But the assault threw up a whole new set of questions, one she wasn't in any state to try to answer, and something about that gym made her skin crawl. She had no choice but to leave it up to JD. Relinquishing responsibility was not one of her strong suits. She was a Type A personality who relished being in charge, especially on a big case like this. Still, even she knew there were some things in life more important than work, and she needed to focus on getting better. The skin around the impact site of the needle had reddened slightly, her body making its own protest against the poison that was seeping in. Charlotte couldn't help but think of the parallels with her life. On a daily basis, she dealt with life's scum, the evil part of humanity that others never even knew existed. She had no doubt it filtered its way into her system, damaging her inside in a way she could never hope to repair. No matter how hard she fought against it, tried to repel it, the task was a futile one. In the end, all she could do was hope that she could do some good, make society a better place. Only time would tell whether that happened or not. Just like the evil that was coursing through her veins, it was a matter of watching and waiting for the outcome. The fact remained. Some survived, some didn't. Her phone buzzed again with another incoming call. Jack. Charlotte let it ring out. She couldn't handle that right now, on top of everything else. Chapter 27. With the morning's chemotherapy still coursing through her veins, Charlotte pulled into the church's pebbled driveway and manoeuvred her way around to the side entry where she could access the office. She knew Joseph would be in there. From where she was parked, she could see out across the ocean, the rough surf battering the cliff face, gulls swooping overhead in the sunlight. She remained in the vehicle for a few minutes to compose herself, reaching into the console and grabbing a mint. She popped it into her mouth and rested her head back. The nausea didn't allow her to eat much, especially on the day of treatment, and even though her stomach was growling, the thought of food almost made her hurl on the spot. Normally, she avoided Joseph in the few days after her chemo, but she needed to see him to try to make things right. This time the queasiness wasn't just from the drugs. This visit was not going to be pleasant. Breath minty fresh, she opened the car door, the burst of warm sea air and natural balm, and wandered over to the office. She spotted Joseph immediately, poised in front of his laptop, a steaming cup of tea and a plate containing 2 biscuits sitting on the desk next to him. "Monte Carlos?" she asked. He looked up, but didn't return her smile. His eyes were tired. "Of course," he answered brusquely, but he offered her one nonetheless. "If you're going to eat sugary crap, it might as well be the best." She waved the plate away, confident that if she ate one, he would regret the clean-up within a minute or two. "Geez, you look like shit," Joseph said, nudging his laptop screen downward and easing his chair away from the desk. His surprise at her appearance seemed to thaw his attitude slightly. "Are you okay?" "I'm not 100%. Just a bug, I think," she said vaguely. "Nothing worse than feeling crap when the weather's warm outside. But enough about me. How are you feeling?" "Are you asking as Detective Callahan or as my sister?" Joseph said, his eyebrows raised. "I've already had your partner out here questioning me, once again inferring that I'm hiding something. I'd back you all the way, Charlotte. Always have, always will. But sometimes I think, you coppers are all the same. Everyone's guilty, and even those who aren't are hiding something." Charlotte shrugged. "That's because it's usually true," she said. "Everyone has secrets, but right now I'm here to check on my brother, the one who got assaulted yesterday." Joseph exhaled, stretching both arms above his head before resting his hands in his lap. "I'm fine," he said, not meeting her gaze. There's a lump on the back of my head where I got whacked. The doctor at emergency said I was probably unconscious for less than a minute. So it's not that big a deal. All the tests came back clear, so nothing to worry about. He ran his hand over the back of his head as he spoke, wincing as he traversed the bump. You sure? I'm sure. They sat in silence, their gazes falling everywhere but on each other. Out the open window, a brightly coloured rosella was attempting to crack a seed pod, swaying on a thin bough, bathed in sunlight. It failed, and took flight in a blur of reds and greens. "Okay," Charlotte said, finally breaking the thickened ice. "Taking my sister hat off and putting my detective one on. What can you tell me about who did it?" "I told you, I've already been through this with Detective Darkin." Joseph's shoulders slumped in frustration. "Do I really have to go through it all again? Or is this a tactic of yours and you're trying to catch me out in a lie or something?" "Don't be stupid, Joe. I want to catch the person who did this. You've had someone attack the church itself and now physically attack you. All that on top of the things we found in your car and you telling us that someone's trying to set you up for the murders? I want to put this whole thing to bed, but I can only do that if I have all the pieces of the puzzle to slot together. Is there anything you can tell me that might help us?" Charlotte sensed a change in him straight away. She was well aware that he wasn't the best liar, and never had been. Something she had taken advantage of many times during their childhood. That hangdog expression was no different now to when she'd caught him sneaking alcohol through the back door and into his bedroom as a teenager. Theirs wasn't a drinking family, so it had become a shared secret between them, a little something she could hold over him when she needed to. He licked his lips, his voice faltering as he spoke. "I told JD everything I could, which wasn't much, but—" "Cut the crap, Joe," Charlotte interrupted, getting out of her seat and perching on the edge of the desk. "You were found unconscious by a parishioner on the floor next to the confessional. Is that correct?" Joseph nodded. "Right. So the attack was either completely random and unprovoked, or it was right after someone had been in the booth. Am I right?" Joseph sat still, his eyes watching her. "If the person was in the booth, that means you have at least some idea of what they look like, albeit through the screen, and it means you probably spoke to them first. And I'm sure they didn't go to confession to talk about leaving the bins out or forgetting to feed the dog." Scanning her brother's face, Charlotte knew she'd hit a nerve, but she also knew the significance he placed on the sanctity of the confessional box. She could try, but she wouldn't break him, even for something as important as this. "I'm neither confirming nor denying anything." He bit into a biscuit, brushing away the array of crumbs from his chest. "He assaulted you, Joseph, put you in hospital. I get that you can't tell me what he said, as much as that pisses me off, but there's nothing to prevent you telling me what he looked like, how he walked, how he talked. You need to tell me what you know so I can help." There was a dilemma etched on Joseph's face. He had been physically assaulted, struck down in the safety of his own church. Why didn't he want to help find the person who did it? Finally, he gave a sigh. "It was a man about my height, I suppose. Nothing special about his accent. He was probably anywhere from 35 to 45, if I had to guess. Nobody I knew." Joseph wasn't a huge man, but he was relatively tall and solid. For someone to knock him out, he would have to be taken by surprise, or physically overpowered. Something a man built like Corey Garcelle would have little trouble doing. "Biggish guy, though?" Charlotte persisted. "Would you say muscly?" "Yeah, possibly, I guess. Like I said, I didn't get a great look at him." Charlotte got off the desk and knelt in front of her brother. "I realize this is difficult for you, but for all we know, this guy might be the one responsible for the killings, murders you have been implicated in, so any tiny morsel of evidence you can give me could be his downfall. It's like dominoes. If we knock the first one down, the others follow suit." As soon as she spoke the words, Charlotte knew she had hit the nail on the head. Joseph began shuffling his hands, rubbing them together in his lap. The colour rose in his cheeks, and he gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. She had grilled hardened criminals before, rapists and murderers. Even they had obvious tells when they lied. By comparison, Joseph was putty in her hands. "Oh my God," she said, realization dawning. "I've told you not to use that expression," Joseph said softly. "The guy who hit you," she continued, ignoring him. "It was him, wasn't it? He told you he killed those women because he knows you can't say anything. Holy shit, Joe!" His body went rigid, his face a dull, blank slate, staring back at her. "Give me something, please," Charlotte implored him. These moments could make or break a case. "Listen, I'm not meant to tell you this, but we've looked into the alibis you provided, and to put it mildly, they aren't ideal. While you told us the truth about where you were on the first 2 occasions, you neglected to tell us that you were alone for the last few hours of both evenings, which means you had both the time and opportunity to commit both crimes. And on the night of the last murder, you were home by yourself, which isn't a crime, but it makes it bloody hard for us to rule you out. If you want me to help you, you need to cooperate before it's too late." Running shaking fingers across his skull, Joseph inhaled the electrified air, his chest expanding. He held a breath, as if challenging himself to make the decision he already knew he had to make. Then he let it out and shook his head. "You have all the details. There's nothing more I can tell you. But Charlotte, it wasn't me. I didn't kill those women." Charlotte snatched up her car keys from the desk and moved for the door, waving her hand over her shoulder. "Wait!" Joseph said suddenly, and Charlotte stopped in the doorway and turned. "Father Alan Watson," he said quietly, his eyes downcast. "You might remember the name. Maybe turn that spotlight of yours onto him for a little while." Then he let out a groan and buried his face in his hands. "Thanks, Joe," Charlotte said softly, not wanting to push him any further. She made her way back out into the sunshine, climbed into the driver's seat and gunned the engine. Accelerating out of the driveway, tiny ash-grey pebbles spraying up onto the underside of her vehicle with a spatter. She considered their conversation. Joseph had given her the impetus she needed to go forward, as much through what he didn't say as what he did. Had his assailant really been the killer? Then there was this other priest, Father Alan Watson. What exactly did he have to do with this? The name rang a vague bell, but nothing more. And most importantly, if it really had been the killer who attacked Joe, it seemed he was now brazen enough to confront her brother, reveal his actions, and assault him. Which meant one of two things. He was arrogant to the point of complacency, or he was mentally starting to unravel. Either way, her case was finally gaining some traction. Back in the office, positioned on all fours in front of the toilet, her chin almost resting on the porcelain rim, Charlotte felt the meagre remains of her stomach contents rise and fall, bile sloshing up the back of her throat. Perspiration rose all over her body, the surface of her skin prickling with moisture. She opened her streaming eyes. The bowl was splattered with vomit, the pungent odour in the small confines of the cubicle almost making her gag again. Swallowing and praying it was over, she felt the urge subside, though the aftertaste still burned in her mouth. She sat back on her heels, wiping the sweat from her eyes, feeling things settle slightly. Even though she'd had to deal with this regularly since starting treatment, throwing up was still throwing up, and it was bloody revolting. She eased herself up and leant against the cubicle wall for support, swallowing rapidly to keep things down for several minutes until the nausea lessened and her jelly legs solidified. After wiping stray hairs and dust from the knees of her pants, she flushed and bid good riddance to another batch. As she stepped out of the cubicle, she heard the entry door to the toilets clunk closed. Someone had just left. Shit. Checking her reflection in the mirror, Charlotte was confronted by the lack of colour in her face, her eyes sunken, wig askew. She looked as rotten as she felt. She cupped some water in her hands and splashed her cheeks, straightening herself up as best she could before heading back out into the office. Fortunately, only Wally was present, having a loud conversation on the phone with the victim of a burglary while he attacked an iced donut like his life depended on it. Approaching her desk, legs still quivering, she stopped, taken aback. Uh-oh. Dash was perched on her desk, clearly awaiting her return, his brow furrowed. Leaving the sanctity of his office was something he usually reserved for major events, both good and bad, and Charlotte knew there was no way she would be getting a pat on the back today.
"You got a sec?"
he said, motioning for her to sit. She did so, gladly.
"Anything you need to tell me?"
he asked, staring right through her. Panicking, Charlotte played innocent. No? Want to give me a hint?" Dash coughed into his hand, his eyes still drilling into her. She half expected bright blue laser beams to dazzle a path between them.
"You've been around for a while, Detective,"
he said, fingers steepled under his chin.
"I shouldn't be lecturing you on the department's policies and procedures, should I?"
Charlotte shook her head. "I guess not." It was more of a question than a statement.
"Really?"
Dash said, bristling.
"Any chance you were going to tell me our prime suspect in these murders is your fucking brother?"
"Half-brother," Charlotte said sheepishly, feeling her already flushed face burn. "And I—"
"Brother, half-brother. Do you really think that's going to matter when or if this case ever gets to trial? Thanks to you, this investigation has been compromised to a level I can't even begin to fathom, let alone try to restore. We're pretty much fucked. You know that, right? You're aware, being the clever little detective you are, that they'll say you did this on purpose, right? A deliberate act by you, designed to keep your brother a free man. What the hell were you thinking, Charlotte?"
She sat still, her head bowed. "I don't think he did it, if that means anything," she said, her voice shaky.
"No, quite frankly, it doesn't. But you better hope for your sake the real killer emerges soon. Look, as disappointed as I am, the reality is I can't do anything about it now. You're in too deep. So we'll all have to keep swimming against the tide of shit and hope we somehow come out the other end without drowning. You know I back you guys to the hilt as much as I can, but you're on your own with this one."
"Yes, boss," Charlotte said, chastised. "I know it doesn't help, but—"
"Shut it." Dash shook his head. "I don't want to hear it, okay? It's now officially your problem, not mine. But there's actually something else I need to talk to you about."
Charlotte looked up, questioning.
"Look, this is a bit more personal," Dash said, leaning in towards her, his voice lowered. "And there is no easy way to ask this. I don't want you to think we've been prying, but I need to know. Were you just vomiting in the toilet?"
Charlotte's heart sank. "Dash, I can explain."
"Look, Charlotte, I get that you're feeling exposed right now, but there are things we, as senior management, are obliged to put in place when an employee is pregnant, and you—"
Whoa! Charlotte was thrown so much she almost laughed. "Hang on a minute. Pregnant? Are you serious?"
"I'm just trying to look after your welfare, Charlotte. I'm not here to judge. None of us are."
Even though she wasn't pregnant, Charlotte still felt indignant. "Not here to judge? You're kidding me. That's exactly what you're doing, and whichever lagger in here has been telling stories about me."
"So you weren't ill in the toilets just now? And these aren't yours?"
Dash tossed an empty blister pack of Charlotte's anti-nausea tablets into her lap, the foil glistening, the smoking gun. "So you're going through my stuff now? Are you fucking serious?" Charlotte was somehow managing to contain her rage and her embarrassment and keep her voice to a whisper. Bringing her hands to her face, she felt the heat of her skin, the evidence of her shame. Dash rested his hand on her shoulder awkwardly, a poor attempt at consoling her.
I'm worried, Charlotte. You're my best detective. And not only that, a good friend. I care about you, as I do everyone in this office, inside and outside work. If I can help you out, I will. But it's a two-way street. You have to keep me informed of what's going on. Our personal lives can have a huge effect on our work, and I need to be sure you can maintain your workload. If not, it's an easy fix and no black mark against your name.
Charlotte sat back, staring up at the ceiling as she gathered herself, conscious of reeling in the anger that seethed inside her before she unleashed a barrage she would later regret. Firstly, I am disgusted that you would go through my bin like the fucking paparazzi.
It was sitting on the top. I would never.
It's my turn to talk, Charlotte hissed, cutting him off. Whether you did it out of genuine concern or not, it's unacceptable. Secondly, not that it's anyone's business but mine, but I am not pregnant, so you can scrap that rumour before it spreads, if it hasn't already. And thirdly, yes, as your little informer told you, I did vomit in the toilets. I've got a virus, okay? You should know better than putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with 46. This right here is anti-nausea medication, which clearly isn't working that well. End of story. Dash nodded slowly, appearing suitably chastised.
You sure?
Charlotte glared at him, a look more effective than words.
Okay, I take your point, and accept your explanation.
He slid off her desk, glancing around the room to ensure their conversation had remained private.
You need me. You know where I am, right?
Charlotte gave a curt nod.
You're all good with this case, then? I don't need to contact West Vale and hand it over? You know it's...
I'm fine. Stop harassing me, and I might be able to get some bloody work done. Raising his hands in surrender, Dash walked away, whistling to himself. Another problem solved. Dickhead, Charlotte thought, sliding her chair back in. She watched the police crest bounce around on her monitor before she entered her password, her fingers still trembling as she unlocked the system. Questions fought for space in her head. Was she really all right? Could she actually pull off this case? Maybe she should just tell the truth. No. Only she knew how determined she was, how strong her self-belief could be. She could do it, and she would do it, even if it killed her. Chapter 28. In the semi-lit beach box, he sat alone, the muted tones of Michael Stipe echoing off the bare and splintering wooden walls. The golden stretch of beach outside was deserted, so he was confident that he wasn't about to be disturbed. Chewing at his fingernails, he could feel the sting of those he had already gnawed too severely, his fingers left throbbing. Somehow he enjoyed the pain. Well, if not enjoyed it, then deserved it at the very least. 11 empty stubbies littered the worn blue carpet that surrounded him like a pitiful lake. His foot now and then nudging one bottle into another, the clink reminding him of the nights when, as a young boy, he had been forced to drink with father, toasting with gusto before every gulp. As disgusting as those memories were, the recollection still made him smile, even now, at this very moment, through the gloom and the guilt. His mobile phone sat on his left leg, its glow lighting up his weary face. With each mouthful of beer, he prodded the play button again. "My name is Father Joseph Callahan. I have made a decision today." Over and over he played it, the false confession searing into his mind. Rubbing at his eyes, he felt his chest heave, the alcohol kicking in, his mind fuzzing over, the ability to think ebbing from his being like the tears that slid down his face. Draped across his right leg was a thick, camel-coloured rope, the end of which he fidgeted with between drinks. Never having tied a noose before, he was unsure how to take the first step, or indeed, if he even could. His mind was fighting the battle. Yes or no? Would it hurt? What if he didn't do it right? Was it possible that he could fail even at that and be forced to live out the remainder of his pitiful days as some sort of embarrassing vegetable? That was his worst nightmare. Though in his darker times he believed he probably deserved that too. When he had started this journey of retribution, he had known it would be difficult. After all, he was a normal person at heart, and what normal person wouldn't find what he had done challenging? It had been almost too much for him to bear. His bottom lip quivered, from sadness or rage, he couldn't tell, and he forced himself to regain control. The alcohol fed the guilt that ate him away from the inside, dragging him down deeper and deeper into the quagmire. He tossed another empty stubby onto the floor with a clatter, then lifted up the rope, running it snake-like through his shaking hands. Of course this was the answer. What did he have to live for? Did he really deserve to live when those innocent girls had been forced to die? In the cool interior of the wooden beach box, he considered the disgrace his life to this point had been. How his innocence had been stolen by those he now sought to bring the hammer of justice down upon. "But I've got you now, you sick bastard," he muttered. He had the recording at his disposal, a confession that, when added to the evidence in Father Callahan's car, would surely be enough to put him away for a long time, a long, long time. Would his death, his life taken by his own hand, mean that they had finally defeated him in the end? He was torn. Was it more important for him to stay and watch the carnage, or should he take the road less travelled and let go of his pain? Didn't he deserve some peace on his own terms? They had created this monster. It was they who had driven him to this point, robbed him of his childhood, and left him a husk of a man. After what he had done, what he had been forced to do, taking his own life should be a walk in the park. Spooling the rope on his leg, he tied a clumsy slip knot in its length. He opened up the circle it created and slid the knot up and down, a tailor measuring up. His work was complete. Well, good enough anyway. It was far from textbook, but he was sure it would do the trick. It had to. Standing, he felt himself wobble, the haze in his head refusing to clear. There was a pulsing behind his eyes, his vision clouding around the edges. Images of the women he had killed flashed in his mind, the intimate noises of their deaths echoing in his thoughts, every sound another nail in his coffin. It was now or never. He grunted as he tossed the rope high, watching it arc over one of the thick exposed beams that crisscrossed the roof of the structure. His hand on the back of the chair, he stepped up onto it, his trembling legs barely able to hold him up. Finding his balance, he reached up and grasped the end of the rope in his shaking hand, pulling it down towards him until it reached the right height. Pausing, he looked around, taking in the view from the position he was now in, the last view he would ever see in his life. 3 boogie boards, dull red, fluorescent green, and egg yolk yellow, gathered dust in one corner, long forgotten. 2 folding beach chairs were propped against the side wall, a crusting of sand sprinkled on their metal legs like icing sugar on a sponge cake. 2 towels, still damp, hung over a set of cricket stumps. The plastic bat leaning against the wall nearby, its rubber ball camped at its feet. A dog-eared book was wedged upside down between the wooden palings. Elements of a seaside life frozen in time. He hopped off the chair and stumbled over to the wall, where he fastened the rope to a central beam, winding it around and around until the slack was taken up, before securing it firmly taut. "Here's to nothing." He barely recognized his own voice as it rebounded back at him in the stale air. He slopped down the dregs from the last bottle, then tossed it at the back wall, taking some pleasure from the splintered emerald glass that showered down onto the floor. With one foot raised on the chair, he fought back tears. Really?
What would he miss from this pathetic life? This could be one of the few productive things he had done in his lifetime. Maybe the only one. Even his relationships with women had been virtually non-existent in his miserable journey. They had thought he was weak, that he wasn't normal. But how could he expect to be normal after that? Normal, to him, had changed so much. Maybe he had never really known what it was in the first place. Rising up to his full height on the chair, he sniffed loudly, like a child, and eased the noose around his neck. With his right hand, he manoeuvred the small bundle of knots downward until he felt them nudge into the hollow where his jawline and ear met. His legs began to tremble violently. "Fuck!" he yelled, almost losing his balance as the chair quivered beneath him. His whole body shook, the terror of what he was about to do mingling with the unsteadiness the alcohol had brought on. This was his choice, his decision. He wasn't about to let that be snatched away from him as well. As he regained his balance, the rough texture of the rope rubbed into the skin of his throat. Tears flowed down his face, dripping off his chin and splashing onto the chair at his feet. Lord of his own domain for what felt like the first time in his life, he took in his surrounds for the final time, a deep breath, and he stepped off. Chapter 29. Father Alan Watson. Usual spelling, I suppose. Sleeves rolled up, J.D. sat before the computer, a half-eaten green apple rocking back and forth on the desk every time he typed. He keyed the letters like a man possessed, slamming his fingers down with precision, the noise reverberating around the empty room. The rest of the squad had already knocked off for the day, most likely reconvened at Irish McGee's, downing a cold one all three. "And got him," J.D. said, as Charlotte hovered behind him, peering over his shoulder like a pirate's parrot. "Okay, well, that's interesting. I don't think the good father is going to be able to help us much, unless Joseph has a direct line, of course." J.D. pointed at the screen, his index finger next to the flashing red notification. Date of death. "That's almost 2 years ago to the day," Charlotte said, her brow knitted as she chewed on her bottom lip. "I spoke to the cardinal who controls this area. He couldn't tell me a whole lot because of what he termed confidentiality issues, but he was able to confirm that this Father Watson and my brother worked together at a parish on the other side of the state years ago, back in the 80s. But I can't see how that relates to what's going on at the moment." She paused, waiting for inspiration to strike. "What about his death? Anything related to that?" "Not in our system, but that's understandable," J.D. replied, scanning the page. "Let's see what Dr. Google says." He opened the browser, plugged the name into the search engine, and smashed Enter. As they waited for the internet to work its magic, Charlotte saw her face reflected in the screen. Thinner than it once had been, anxious, her eyes watching, waiting for answers. The page flickered to life, the search results pooling down the screen in rapid succession. "Oh, fuck," they both muttered the words at the same time. J.D. clicked on the first article and was taken to the front page of a newspaper website. The headline blazed, "Mystery surrounds horrific death of local Westvale priest." Beneath it was a large picture of Father Alan Watson, draped in his ceremonial robes and standing on the steps of his church, arms held above him, gesturing to the heavens. A smile was spread across his face like butter. This was a man at peace with himself and his place in the world. Scanning the article, Charlotte read the important bits out loud. "Intrigue surrounds the death of prominent Westvale priest Alan Watson. Found in his burnt-out Volvo station wagon, seated behind the wheel with his seatbelt still on, in what has been described as a questionable area of parkland near a secluded toilet block. Police refuse to comment or speculate but are treating his death as suspicious. An investigation is underway to determine the exact cause of death. A crime scene has been set up and the entire area is being forensically examined for any evidence that may lead to a possible suspect.
Police are urging anyone with information to call blah blah blah.
Well, fuck me, JD said, looking up at her in surprise. Can't say I was expecting that.
You and me both, Charlotte said. Let's see what else we've got here. Returning to the search screen, she scrolled down the list of articles and selected one that had been published only 6 months ago. Opening it up, she found it had the same picture of Father Watson alongside a 3-paragraph piece. Investigators have posted a $250,000 reward to the public for any information that can lead to an arrest in the brutal West Vale murder of local priest Father Alan Watson. 18 months ago, Father Watson was found deceased in his vehicle in what police believe was a targeted attack. Seasoned police officers have described the attack as vicious and believe Father Watson was drugged before being placed in his car, which was then set alight. Somebody out there knows who did this, lead investigator Senior Sergeant Rob Langer said in a media conference yesterday. We implore that person or persons to come forward. You will be protected, and you will be eligible for this substantial reward if the information you provide leads to a conviction. This was an abhorrent attack on an upstanding member of our community, and something we as a society simply cannot tolerate. When questioned about a possible motive for the attack, Senior Sergeant Langer refused to comment. When further pressed on whether the police have any suspects in mind, he stated there are several persons of interest who have come to the attention of the investigators. However, no charges have been laid at this point. Charlotte leant back from the screen. What on earth has Joseph got himself into here? He's obviously got some history with this priest, and the fact that he mentioned his name to me probably means that someone mentioned it to him. I'm guessing the man who assaulted him, whoever he is. And if that man is also responsible for what happened to Father Watson in West Vale, then maybe Joe is in more danger than we anticipated. JD reached for his half-eaten apple, then sank back into his chair. Charlotte watched as he spun the apple in his fingers, the shiny green skin bright in the muted light of the office, before he chomped down on it like a hungry hippo. Let's not forget one thing, he said as he munched. And I know he's your brother, but Joseph himself is still a suspect in the murders of these 3 girls. He may end up being charged, and if we were to follow the evidence we've collected so far, that would probably be the case. If it were anyone else, Charlotte, you know as well as I do that we'd be all over them like a cheap suit. I'm not saying he's had special treatment, but up to this point, the fact that he's your brother has helped rather than hindered him. Knowing there was truth in what JD was saying, Charlotte gave a resigned nod as he continued. There were no witnesses to Joseph's alleged assault at the church, and I know he got some minor injuries, but apart from that, his version of what happened is completely unsubstantiated. We need to exercise caution, that's all, same as we would with any other victim. Joseph knew Father Watson and would have known where he worked. So until the killer is caught, we treat everyone with the same level of suspicion. Charlotte got to her feet, tapping a blue pen against her chin as she paced the room. Bear with me for a second, she said, her brain almost audibly ticking as it processed her thoughts. Something was gnawing away at the inner layer of her mind, a thin recollection, a splinter of something valuable. Then it clicked and she froze mid-step. Norman Bachmeyer, she said. Check him again for me. JD's fingers attacked the keyboard again, a flurry of motion and noise, and the database sprung up. We've done this 1,000,000 times already, Charles. I'm surprised you don't know his criminal record by heart. He nodded at the screen as a photo of Norman appeared next to his expired driver's license details. He looked a fair bit tidier than when Charlotte had seen him in the alcove behind the library. That's your man. NFPA, no fixed place of abode. What about him, anyway? Charlotte strode back to JD's workstation. Check his previous addresses. JD raised eyebrows. He has no previous address. He's homeless, remember? Just do it, Charlotte said impatiently. Whatever you say, boss. He did as she asked, and the previous address page flicked up onto his screen. Nothing to see here, NFPA, listed as right here in this fair town, like we knew it would be. Next page, Charlotte said, pointing at the screen. That only goes back 18 months. As JD clicked forward on the continuing list of past addresses for Norman, Charlotte leant closer to the screen. Then her finger came to rest halfway down the page. The entry was dated 2 years ago. No fixed place of abode, Westvale. Charlotte bounced on the balls of her feet as the printer buzzed. This development was exactly what she had been working towards. Another little thread that she could unravel to help prove her brother innocent. She snatched the printout from the tray and held it aloft. But then, poised to speak, she was interrupted by sounds of a scuffle from down the hallway. Raised voices from the uniform section, arms and legs slapping into walls. Without a word, she and JD reacted, bolting from their office towards the cell area, where the trouble always started. Rounding the corner, Charlotte saw 3 uniformed coppers splayed on the ground, wrestling and trying to control a man who was clearly putting up a decent fight. Kicking wildly, he slithered across the floor and out of their grasps. Jumping straight in without a thought, Charlotte flopped on top of the man's legs, rendering them useless as he bucked and writhed beneath her. And the other officers were able to gain some ascendancy over the top half of his body. "Settle down! Stop resisting!" the sergeant yelled, driving his knee into the man's back as JD and another officer forced his arms behind him to slap on the handcuffs. Charlotte heard the ratcheting of the mechanism as the male was secured. The man calmed almost immediately, as if aware the battle had been lost. A fish reeled in, now lying stationary on the boat floor. As he was rolled up into a sitting position, everyone took the chance to catch their breath. Only then did Charlotte see who he was. Chapter 30. "What the fuck are you doing here?" Charlotte couldn't believe her eyes. The restrained man, now sitting upright on the floor and gulping in mouthfuls of air, was none other than Corey Garcelle. He looked up at her, his reddened, grazed face almost unrecognizable as the dynamic person they had spoken to only days earlier, totally in command of his environment, the Wolfpack leader. "Good question," he grunted back at her, a thread of saliva dangling from the corner of his mouth, his right cheek compressed from its position on the floor. "Ask those arseholes!" He nodded towards the 2 uniformed members now resting against the charge counter. The younger, more muscular one turned, eyes ablaze. Without warning, he cocked his right arm and clipped Garcelle across the top of the head. "Watch your fucking mouth!" "Enough!" Charlotte yelled, stepping between Garcelle and the officer and shoving her colleague out of the way. "Get yourself under control or get out of here, constable!" The young officer glared at her, his flat top haircut razor sharp. A condescending smile broke across his face, a look that screamed, "What would you know, old lady? Get back behind your desk." But he still took her advice and wandered off down the hallway, flexing his arms behind his back as he went. Where's the respect? Charlotte thought, harking back to her first few years in the job. She would never have got away with treating the higher ranks like that. How things had changed. Garcelle was still wincing from the blow as JD stood him up, resting him against the corridor wall. "Sorry about that," Charlotte said, hands on hips. "But you need to watch your mouth around here. We don't like being spoken to like crap any more than you do. Keep that up and I can't guarantee someone else won't give you more of the same." Garcelle remained mute, staring ahead as if Charlotte hadn't even spoken, his eyes glazed over. She shuffled him into the adjoining interview room and sat him down in a chair on the far side of the table. JD joined them, pushing the door closed with his heel to ensure their privacy. He gave Charlotte a thumbs up. "He's ours for 5 or 10 until the boys get their shit sorted out." Charlotte took a seat and rested her hands on the table in front of her, her fingernails clicking together, her head angled down. She waited, testing his patience. An experiment he passed with flying colours. After a minute, she couldn't take any more. "So, you okay?" He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Good. Now let me ask you again. What are you doing here?" Garcelle went to speak, but stopped. Charlotte knew he was contemplating whether it was better to put his trust in the devil he knew. "Can I get these cuffs off first?" he muttered, all pretense of superiority gone. "My wrists are killing me." Charlotte nodded at J.D., who unshackled Garcelle, playing the cuffs back through their ratchet several times before sliding them back into his pocket. Garcelle flexed his wrists, red welts visible on his skin. "Okay, now talk." "Fine," he said, leaning back into his chair, creating distance. "It's all bullshit, though. I'll give you that much for free." "You'll give me everything for free. What's all bullshit?" "All the stuff about that girl at the gym. I tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen. They said something about a statement that they were compelled to act." "Compelled to act, my ass." Charlotte sat up a little straighter, her interest jolted. "What girl?" "One of the regulars. I think her name is Sarah. She's a Kiwi. Reckon she's pretty special. Apparently she told the coppers I've been stalking her, which is absolute rubbish. She's fucking delusional, that's what she is. I wouldn't stalk that fat bitch if you paid me." A tingle of recognition eased its way up Charlotte's spine. In every investigation there came a pivotal moment, where the clouds dispersed and everything became crystal clear. She wasn't at that point yet, but she couldn't help but notice a darker, more aggressive side to the man before her, forcing its way out of hiding. Perhaps the true Corey Garcelle was finally making an appearance. "Stalking? That's a nasty accusation, Corey," she said, her tone even. "That sort of thing is frowned upon. Haven't you seen the ads on telly? We're meant to treat women better than that these days." "What is she saying you did?" "Those pricks who brought me in wouldn't tell me much. Something about me touching her during her workouts, my car being parked out the front of her place, and some text messages I sent. But I can explain everything. I help everyone who joins the gym through their first few workouts, familiarise them with the equipment. Do I touch them? Of course I do. The guys and the girls. I'm a personal trainer, for God's sake. And the text messages are automated ones sent to everyone about new deals and special offers. They come from my phone, but it's all part of the service. She needs to get a grip. Truth is, she tried to crack onto me and I turned her down. I'm happily married. Why would I risk that on her? She's just out to get revenge. A woman scorned and all that. What a fucking joke. Why aren't you out catching real criminals instead of stitching up innocent people like me?" Charlotte let him rant. She noticed he'd conveniently left out the little problem of his car being parked out the front of the woman's house. J.D. gave her a knowing look, obviously thinking the same thing. "What's with the attitude, Corey?" she asked calmly, monitoring his expression. "We're just doing our job, same as the fellas who arrested you. If someone makes a complaint, we investigate it. If you have nothing to hide, nothing can be found." She enjoyed tightening the screws, especially on a suspect like Garcelle, who they had nothing on but suspicion. Sometimes the pressure got too much, and crooks capitulated, breaking down in a snotty heap and confessing to everything but kidnapping the Beaumont children. "Yeah, right, whatever. Well, I'll be saying no comment. I've watched Law and Order, you know. I've seen the way you lot twist people's words in those interviews. Not me." Charlotte shrugged, collected her daybook and rose from her chair, beckoning for J.D. to do the same. She eased open the interview room door before hesitating, running her fingers through her hair as she allowed J.D. to lead the way out. "Keep that up," she said, turning back to Garcelle, eyes suddenly lit, "and we might be seeing a little more of each other. Enjoy your stay, Corey." Just over an hour later, Charlotte stood at her office window, playing listlessly with the blind cord as she watched Corey Garcelle leave the building, a copy of his intervention order paperwork flapping in his hand. There was an embarrassed shuffle to his gait, his eyes darting. People loved getting out of a police station almost as much as the dentist. She kept her eye on him as he disappeared from sight, his silhouette blurring into the heat haze of the late afternoon. As it did, the reporter Caitlin McBride appeared like a mirage, a cockroach that had scuttled out from under a fridge in hot pursuit. Charlotte yanked the cord, closing the revolving blinds and severing herself off from the outside world. Something about Corey Garcelle wasn't right. She could feel it. Time would reveal if her suspicions were legitimate. But could she, and more importantly, the women of the town she was paid to protect, take that risk? This ends CD 5. CD 6. Chapter 31. As the final embers of a blazing sunset fizzled out on the horizon, his anticipation built. Reaching up, he caressed the underside of his jaw, the tender bruising angled all the way round to the base of his earlobe, an indigo, lopsided grin. It had been a long day. He had regained consciousness on the floor of the beach box, his legs twisted beneath him, the coiled noose still tight around his neck. His face had been resting in a crimson pool of blood and saliva, his left cheek damp from the mix, skin wrinkled. His tongue, bitten and swollen, had lolled from his mouth, resting on his parched lower lip. As his blurred vision had cleared, his eyes had taken in the frayed end of the rope, only inches from his face. Head thumping from the alcohol and dehydration, he had pushed himself up to a seated position and promptly vomited. A torrent of liquid waste exiting his mouth like a waterfall, splashing onto his clothing as it hit the carpeted floor. His tears had flowed just as freely. He had been given a second chance. God, or whatever entity was out there, had interceded and snapped the rope, allowing him to survive. To him that was a sign, an indication that his work was not yet finished. There was punishment still to be meted out, and he was the one to do it. He had cleaned up the mess, returning the structure to the state it had been in when he'd found it, and left, the glaring sunlight almost piercing his fragile skull. His mind had throbbed, the pain unbearable, his eyelids like coarse sandpaper every time they fluttered. Somehow, he had made it home, and, after a scalding shower, slept for the entire afternoon, his wounded body and soul desperate for slumber. Now, though, he had recovered, revitalized and re-energized. He was ready, and the time had come once again. After the altercation with the priest, he had kept a bit of a low profile, unsure whether he had been seen in the area around the church or not. Up until now, there had been nothing about the incident in the media, but he had heard an advertisement on the radio for the nightly news, which had mentioned an exclusive interview with Father Callahan. The program was starting in a few minutes, and he was more than a little concerned. His apartment was sparse, chic, cool, but bare. He'd read in magazines that they called it minimalism. The reality was, he couldn't find anything he liked enough to have in his home. The walls and furniture were all white, sterile almost, which was how he preferred it. Splashes of colour from little trinkets here and there were enough for him. People made places homely, not things. He switched on the 55-inch plasma TV, hearing it buzz softly before the crystal-clear picture sprang to life. Sipping his scotch on the rocks to dull the pain in his neck, he turned up the volume and sat through several mundane stories before Father Callahan's ugly head appeared in the top right corner under the headline, "Priest Prays for Calm." He pumped up the volume even more, feeling his pulse quicken. A reporter with dark hair cut into a severe bob began speaking. Local priest Father Joseph Callahan, who had been assisting police with their inquiries into the recent Gull Bay murders, has himself been assaulted by an unidentified assailant. Police say Father Callahan, a long-standing member of the Catholic Church and local priest for several years, was hit from behind, knocking him unconscious for a short period of time, during which the male offender escaped. When spoken to earlier today, a clearly affected Father Callahan had this to say about the incident. The footage cut to an image of Father Callahan standing on the steps of the church, dressed in full religious garb, his hands clasped in front of him like a choirboy. He looked every bit his age, his wrinkled face strained and weary, his bald head glistening in the sunlight. As I told the police, I have no idea why it happened. We were going through the usual rites of confession when things got a little heated and he stormed out. I came out to see if he was all right, and that's the last I remember. It's all come as a bit of a shock that someone would do such a thing. Given the recent climate of violence, I would call on this man to hand himself in to the authorities. If the church can't help him, perhaps the police can. The priest stared directly into the camera lens as he spoke this last sentence, and the message wasn't lost. The reporter continued. Police have asked anyone who may have seen a man approximately 6 feet tall, solid build, and dressed in dark clothing leaving the church area around 8 p.m. last night to contact them immediately. They have also asked anyone who may have any information regarding this incident or the recent tragedies in the area to ring Crime Stoppers on... He hit the mute button. He'd heard enough crap for one night. What a pity the old prick didn't tell them the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Now, that would have made for some interesting viewing. He couldn't help but smile, though. The bastard had looked as if he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had endured that weight for more than 20 years. Any piece of payback was better than none. They had taken everything from him, stolen it, yielded to their own depravities without a second thought for him. He sculled the rest of his drink, then grabbed his bag and headed out the door, a monster on the prowl once again. It was time to show that stupid, arrogant, God-fearing motherfucker who was boss. Chapter 32, 1987. Just leave me alone! I swung my right hand as hard as I could and slapped Jacinta across the face. It made a really loud noise, and I saw her reach up and grab her cheek, but I didn't hang around to see if she was okay. I just pulled my shorts back up and ran as fast as I could across the oval. As I crouched behind the toilet block alongside the wire fence that bordered the school, my whole body shook. Covering my face with my hands, I hid from the world. If I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. Tears trickled down my face, and I wiped them away as best I could, but that only made me sadder. I was still crying, struggling a little bit to breathe, when Mr. Carthage came around the corner and knelt down next to me. I screwed myself up into a ball to protect myself against the lecture I knew I was about to get. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. He reached out a hand and rested it on my grubby knee. I flinched at his touch, an unexpected whimper leaving my mouth. Shaking my head, I squished my eyelids together, praying for the tears to stop. I could tell my face must have been so red. It was burning up. Felt like it was going to melt right off my head any second, like those bad guys in that scene at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Mr. Carthage shuffled alongside me and leant back against the wire fence, the extra weight causing the tension to sag. I peered through my wet eyelashes at him. He had his hands clasped in front of him, and he was looking up at the sky, which was a perfect blue, with a single really thin cloud stretching from one side to the other. I could hear the other kids still on the oval, playing and laughing like normal. For everyone else, it was just another day. "Want to tell me what happened?" Mr. Carthage said, breathing out a sigh after he spoke, like he was disappointed in me. I don't know why. I hadn't done anything wrong. Well, not really. I shook my head, feeling my bottom lip quiver. Jacinta says you hit her, and some of the other students told me that's true, but I can't believe you would do that. I know you're a ripper kid. That's not like you at all. It makes me think there's more to it. Can you tell me what happened so I can figure out what really went on? Is everything all right at home? I sucked in air, a big breath that straight away calmed me down. After a few more, I was ready to talk. My words were quiet. Jacinta. She dacked me in it. I started crying again, embarrassed at the way my body was making me feel. Hot, sweaty, breathless, nervous. She pulled your pants down? Mr. Carthage said, surprised. In front of other students? Yes, I replied, barely a whisper. "There were a few other kids there. I think she was only joking around, but she shouldn't do that to me. Nobody should do that to me. That's why I hit her." A single tear ran down my warm cheek, and I hoped it would be the last one. Mr. Carthage patted me on the thigh, and I felt my skin crawl again. "You're right," he said, looking right into my eyes as he spoke. "Jacinta shouldn't do that to you or anyone else for that matter. And I will speak to her about what is and isn't appropriate behaviour in the playground. But are you sure there isn't anything else going on you need to tell me about?" I reckon he could hear my heart thumping in my chest, it was beating so hard. Of course there was other stuff going on, but how could I tell him when I couldn't even tell Mum? Instead, I sat there, cradling my knees, and shook my head, short, sharp flicks from side to side, hoping he would drop it. He didn't. "Come with me, mate. We'll go to the principal's office and sort everything out. And don't worry, I'll be there to keep you out of too much strife." He helped me to my feet, and we wandered back to the office, Mr. Carthage's hand resting on my shoulder. It wasn't so bad. He was nice, and I could tell he was trying to help me, so it felt different. Lots of kids were staring at me, but I kept my head down, scuffing my clunky school shoes as we walked. Some classmates came up to see if I was okay, but Mr. Carthage waved them away before they got too close. I could feel my face burning, more from them all seeing what Jacinta did to me than from me hitting her or getting in trouble for it. Everyone got in trouble sometimes. When we got to the principal's office, Jacinta was already there, and it looked like she'd been crying too. Her cheek was still pretty red, and I couldn't believe I was responsible for doing that to her, even though she probably deserved it. They made us both apologize to each other, and then called our parents in. Mum was angry, really angry. I hadn't seen her that mad in a long time. Not since I was fiddling with the car radio knob and it snapped right off in my hand. Boy, she went crazy when that happened, and that was an accident. But somehow, it seemed she was angrier at the school than at me, which didn't really make sense. "Denial?" I heard her yell at the principal, pointing in his face. "Denial? There's no denial here. I can promise you that. You do your job teaching my son, and I'll do my job being his mother, okay?" She stormed out of the office and grabbed me by the arm, pulling me out of the orange plastic chair I'd been slumped in and half dragging me after her, my bag bouncing along the ground behind us. "We're going home," she muttered, frowning at me as we walked outside and across the basketball courts. "I'm done with this bloody school, once and for all." I struggled to keep up, desperately trying to hold myself together. Tears welled in my eyes again, but I forced them back as best I could. That was when I saw Ben. He was standing next to the school gate, like he'd known ahead of time we'd be leaving that way. He watched us come towards him, Mum in the lead, flustered and fast, me dragging my feet behind her. He stepped back from the exit to let us through, his face kind, like he wanted to talk to me, but was too worried to even open his mouth. As I reached him, he raised his right hand and high-fived me. The clap of our palms, striking each other, rang out, and I couldn't help but think it sounded just like when I hit Jacinta. "Later, dude." I paused for a second next to him, a strange feeling in my head like this was a moment I needed to remember. Our eyes met, and we both smiled. Ben winked at me. That cheeky smile on his face always made me feel like everything was going to be all right, no matter how bad it seemed. "Catcha?" he said quietly. I walked away, waving back to him as Mum fed my school bag into the open mouth of the car boot, before slamming the boot shut. We got in, and Mum accelerated away down the driveway. Ben getting smaller and smaller at the rear windscreen until we veered left and he disappeared. I never saw him again. Chapter 33. Benjamin Willett sat in front of his television, dumbstruck. A news story about a priest was just coming to an end. He was glued to his lounge chair and felt as if his whole world had come crashing down around him in one colossal moment, as if his flesh
had turned to cement, gravity increasing tenfold. Heart-thumping, Ben's whole body started to shake as wave after wave of memories resurfaced, each more horrific than the last. Tossing his dinner off his lap and onto the small coffee table beside him, Ben scrambled for the bathroom. He launched at the toilet as his stomach churned and his body expelled all it could. Afterwards, he lay still on the bathroom floor, his head spinning, mind racing, a sheen of sweat covering every inch of his skin. He knew something momentous had occurred. Life questions, dark swirling masses inside him that had remained unsolved for so many years, had at last been given foundation. He sobbed like a child, his body twisted, the cold tiles providing little relief. He was at once revolted, surprised, relieved, horrified, and angered. Most importantly, though, he felt compelled, duty-bound to do the right thing. This was a life-changing moment, and he knew he had to act while the urge was at its strongest, despite the repercussions. He forced himself not to think about the impact this would have on his wife, his daughter, his family, those he had made a life with. He crawled back out into the lounge room and reached for the phone, dialed the number for information, and obtained the contact number for the local police in the area where the story had originated. Then, steeling himself, he dialed again, and eventually got through to the department handling the investigation.
Criminal Investigation Unit, Detective John Darkin speaking.
Ben paused for a moment, his voice catching in his throat. His brain shot into overdrive, images flashing before his eyes at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Hello? Anyone there?
Ben slowed down his breathing and composed himself, his heart returning to his chest instead of trying to burst through it.
Yeah,
he said, his voice croaky.
I'm here. How can I help?
The detective said.
I need to make a report.
Ben's words tripped out unevenly.
Okay, you've been put through to the wrong department, the detective said in a hurry. If you hold on a second, I'll...
No, wait! Ben yelled. He had to seize this moment or he might never embrace it again. It's about that priest. The one who was on the news tonight. Who got assaulted? I've got some information. As if he'd just announced the winning numbers for the upcoming week's lotto, Ben felt the level of interest the detective had in this call spike.
Okay, give me a second.
There were distinctive noises on the other end of the line, paper being shuffled about and the clicking of a ballpoint pen.
All right, sorry about that,
the detective said, returning to the phone.
Can I get your name?
Ben provided all his details, knowing that in doing so, he had passed the point of no return.
Okay, what have you got for us, Ben? Do you know who assaulted Father Callahan?
He could almost see the detective, phone wedged between his chin and his shoulder, pen poised over the page. It was now or never.
I was an altar boy,
Ben said, his voice surprisingly steady.
Back in the mid to late 80s. That priest who was on the TV tonight was one of two who served at my parish at that time. Until tonight, I had forgotten all about him, or maybe I erased him from my memory on purpose. I don't know. But when I saw him, when I heard his voice, I remembered everything.
Go on, the detective said.
I think he did things to me, things that no one should ever do to a child, especially a priest. That bastard took my innocence and smashed it to pieces.
There was silence between the two men. The detective broke first.
That is a grave allegation, Ben, and one that we take very seriously. You say you think? Exactly what do you mean by that? A long time has passed since these alleged events. Are you positive it was Father Callahan?
Ben hesitated, feeling like he was being given the brush off, something he was not prepared for. Typical copper.
He tossed the phone down onto the cushion beside him and watched as it bounced onto the floor with a crack. Then he leant forward and buried his face in his hands, elbows locked on his knees. His resolve was taking a battering. It had taken all his courage to make this phone call, and now he had to find even more, to scrape that barrel one last time. After everything that had happened, he couldn't stumble at this last hurdle. But a copper who didn't believe him, or worse, one who didn't care, would destroy him.
Hello? Are you still there? Hello?
He could just make out the voice, its tinny tone reminding him of the old-time radio shows he had been forced to listen to in history class. With no alternative but to push on and rely on hope, Ben reached down for the phone and brought it back to his ear. "It's him. I'm positive." "Do you think I would forget someone like that? Not a bloody chance. I said I think, because I can't be sure exactly what he did. But I'm certain he was there in the room. It was him and another priest. They were in it together. Yes, it was a long time ago, but I will never forget those two faces, ever." "I'm not saying I don't believe you, Ben. I just need you to be absolutely sure before we even think about acting on something as sensitive and damaging as this. These types of allegations can ruin people's lives. So we have to be sure, or at least have enough evidence that we can get it to court and have a reasonable chance of winning. If not, we're shooting at targets in the dark. And if we can prove it was him, I'm your man. I'll be all over him like a rash." Ben nodded to himself, reassured by the detective's fighting words. "Do you have any idea who the other priest was?" the detective said. "No, I've forgotten. He was older, though. Probably dead by now. I hope he's carked it anyway. He would be no loss to society, believe me," Ben said, his nerves finally calming a little. Detective Darkin cleared his throat. "Could his name have been Father Alan Watson?" A shiver flitted down Ben's spine. "Yes," he said, his voice shaky. I mean, yes, he was definitely a Father Alan. I can't believe I had forgotten that. That name haunted me for years. But how do you know him?" There was a pause, and the sound of more shuffling papers. "I can't tell you too much at this stage," the detective said, piquing Ben's curiosity. "Let's just say your wish has already been granted when it comes to Father Alan." "What? He's dead?" Ben asked, trying to keep his words from oozing the hope he felt. "Unfortunately, yes," the detective replied. "He was murdered." "Maybe there is a God after all," Ben muttered. "So what happens now?" "There's a process we have to follow. Got to dot all the I's and cross all the T's to ensure that down the track we can get a conviction in court. We'll need to get a detailed statement from you, times, dates, the exact nature of the incidents. Anyone who might have witnessed anything? Other than the two priests, is there anyone who might have seen something? Cleaners, church staff?" "Yeah, of course there was. The other kid who went through it all with me." "There was another kid? In the room with you?" "Yep." Ben spat the word out with disgust. "They preyed on us both." "Do you remember the other boy's name?" Detective Darkin asked. "And can you be sure he was assaulted too?" "His name was Johnny, and yeah, I'm sure. We didn't speak about it much, but we shared that look. He knew I was going through exactly what he was. I can't remember his surname. If you went back through the parish books, you'd probably be able to find it, if they bothered to keep a record of those things, or if they didn't destroy them all, any shred of proof that we even existed." "Right," the detective said. "I'll look into it. One other thing, though. Have you been in the Gold Bay area recently?" Ben sensed a change in the tone of the conversation, as if the air temperature had dropped a degree or two. "No," he said carefully. "I'm a good hour or so away. I don't really have any need to come down there. Why do you ask? Is this for the statement?" "Yes and no," Detective Darkin replied. "Look, I've been playing this game for a long time. I appreciate you calling in, and I'm genuinely empathetic of your situation.
But your story also gives you the motive to try to bring Father Joseph down. Revenge is one of the most powerful motivators there is. To do my job properly, I need to rule you out as a possible suspect in the recent murders of these 3 women." "You're fucking kidding me!" Ben almost hung up on the spot. Collapsing back onto the couch, he drew the phone away from his ear. His knuckles were white and his forearms strained, his vice-like fingers squeezing the phone like a wet sponge. How could he possibly be seen as anything but a victim here? What the fuck? But he knew that anger would achieve nothing. He lifted the phone. "I'm reporting a monster. A vile creature who defiled not only me, but probably a string of other kids as well. And all you can do is try to pin some unrelated murder cases on me? I've heard of desperation, Detective, but that's fucking ridiculous." Darkin sighed. "Listen, Ben. I do my job as best I can, all of the time. As a detective, I have to look at 3 things: motive, means, and opportunity. Until at least one of those things can be crossed off your list, I can't rule you out. And at the moment, you have one big tick next to the motive box. So, you can either help me out here or take your complaint elsewhere. Now, tell me about this other kid, Johnny. Any idea what's happened to him or where he's living these days?" "No," Ben replied, short and sharp, before he wilted with a sigh and elaborated. "His family moved away not long after all this happened. I never knew if his parents found out and got him the hell out of there, or whether it was just coincidence. Although, come to think of it, I'm pretty sure they moved down your way, but it was a long time ago. Lord knows where he is now." "Okay. I'll make some inquiries and see what I can come up with. In the meantime, you need to lie low and keep quiet about all this. The last thing we want is a media circus. Do you understand?" "Yeah, I understand," Ben said. "Just try to get things moving as soon as you can. I couldn't handle it if any other kids got hurt." Appointments were made and inquiries set. For Ben, though, the nightmare had only just begun. He had ripped the Band-Aid off a sore that had been festering away for years. The sad part was, he knew recovery, if it ever occurred, would take many more. Chapter 34. Charlotte's radio crackled to life. Another menial job doled out for the van to attend. This time, it was a neighbourhood dispute over the placement of rubbish bins for collection that had somehow got out of hand and resulted in a punch being thrown. "Can't you just be adults and sort it out yourselves?" Charlotte said to herself. Midnight Oil played softly in the background, and she drummed her hands on the steering wheel as she drove. Not quite to Rob Hurst's standards, but she still managed to maintain the beat of the final stanza of the Power and the Passion drum solo. As the guitars crunched back in, she trawled the main street for the 4th time that shift, her eyes darting from alcove to recess, searching through a prism of polarized sunglasses and tinted windows. They had a keep a lookout for out on Norman Bachmeyer. Since the revelation that he had been homeless in the Westvale area at the time of Father Watson's murder, every police officer on duty had been searching for him, so far without success. His usual sleeping spaces had been vacated, the shopkeepers and locals all coming up with similar versions of the same useless information. "Yeah, I think I saw him a few days ago." "Norman? Not seen him for a while now." And Charlotte's personal favourite, "You're the police. Shouldn't you know where he is?" With the air conditioning pumping, it was much more pleasant inside the vehicle than outside, where the mercury was sitting at around 36 degrees. The sun was beating down on the asphalt, and the locals crept from shaded area to shaded area like cockroaches. She drove past Keen's Bakehouse, the unmistakable smell of pastry sneaking in through the vents, doing its utmost to draw her in. Her foot was poised over the brake pedal when her phone rang, stealing her concentration and saving her from succumbing to the sugary sweet treats. "Callahan," she said, her eyes still scanning the street as she spoke. "Charlotte, it's Tom. Have you got a second?"
For my favourite copper? Always. OK, Tom replied a little hesitantly. But I'm not sure how my number one ranking is going to handle what I've got to tell you. Can we catch up somewhere? I prefer to do this face to face. I'm outside Keen's at the moment. The back car park in 5 minutes? Deal. See you shortly. In the time it took Charlotte to park, enter the bakehouse, make her selection, and then return to the comfort of her car, Tom's marked patrol unit had only just pulled in. He sidled up next to her so that their windows were parallel. Easing hers down, Charlotte felt the heat battle its way into the chilled interior of her territory, winning the fight. Want to jump in? She said to Tom, nodding at her passenger seat. It's bloody hot out there. Won't take long, he said, sliding his sunglasses up onto the top of his head. I thought you should know about a couple of things I stumbled across recently, just between you and me. Charlotte never liked it when people said that. They usually went on to reveal something the whole world should be told about. Confidentiality had its rewards, but it could also transform into your worst enemy. Sure, she chomped down on a ham and cheese croissant as she spoke, crumbs flaking onto her top. Go ahead. Tom reached out across the short distance between them, a printout in his hand. This is off the record, but I managed to get it from a squad mate of mine in Westvale who owed me a favour. It's a reprint of an IFS from a few years ago, one that went dark pretty quickly at the time and has been offline ever since. My mate was semi-involved, so he took a copy for himself back when it first appeared. Bit of insurance, you know. Charlotte nodded, well aware of members collating incident fact sheets to protect themselves. At times, the reports had a tendency to go missing in official circles when subsequent internal investigations occurred. It involves allegations of an assault in custody, Tom said. It went unsubstantiated, of course, but that's not the point. You'll notice halfway down the page who the victim was. Our man of the hour, Norman Buckmeyer. Even back then, it seems, he was causing us grief. Not much has changed, huh? Charlotte pursed her lips, scrutinising the contents of the report as Tom continued. Down the bottom, where it mentions the officers involved, the first one listed there is my squatty, the second his partner on the shift. But notice the third? Sliding her finger down the report, Charlotte halted at the third name in the incident. She glanced sideways at Tom, one eyebrow raised. Surely not. I've double-checked and it was definitely him. Apparently he had a set against Norman back then. Had him in the gun for a series of burglaries that never got solved, including one at his brother's hardware store. Off the record, he supposedly gave him a bit of a touch-up when the uniforms weren't looking. Threatened that if Norman ever said anything about it, there'd be consequences. Did you know anything about that? Not at all. There's been no mention of the two of them having a history whatsoever. Thanks for the heads up, Tom. I owe you one. Another one, you mean? He said, winding up his window and giving Charlotte a mock salute. His vehicle began to roll away before it stopped again, and the window eased back down. I forgot. There's one other thing I had to mention to you. Dash came to the readout this morning, wanting to pick our brains. They're looking for someone. Maybe a crook, maybe a bloke who's a snag short of a barbie, or maybe just a regular guy. First name Johnny. They were a bit vague about it, not even a description of him, but they were keen on getting the details of anyone with that name who he may have dealt with in any capacity here in town. Apparently this Johnny is a possible victim of a historic sexual assault, somehow tied in with that priest who died a couple of years ago in Westvale, and he could be connected to everything that's going on with these current murders and your brother. Suspect or victim, who knows anymore? We're just the minions, kept in the dark. Anyway, you'd already left the office, so I told Dash I'd let you know when I spoke to you. Keep you in the loop. Have I just wasted another 30 seconds of my shift? Or didn't you know about it? Hiding her unease at not being told, Charlotte nodded. Yeah, I got the message earlier, but thanks. All good, mate. Charlotte remained in place as Tom drove away. She shoved the last mouthful of pastry into her mouth against the wishes of her now swirling stomach as questions bounced around her mind. How the hell was she going to handle this? And why was it kept from her in the first place? It didn't make sense. Either way, she needed to find out soon. She tossed the report down on the seat next to her, the name popping out from the page like a jack-in-the-box. John Darkin. Shifting the transmission into drive, Charlotte was disturbed. The pieces were falling into place where she'd rather they didn't. Though she'd never referred to him as Johnny, it seemed her partner had some explaining to do. Chapter 35. Alcohol was the last thing on Charlotte's mind, given the cocktail of medications that were churning around her system. So she settled for a lemon, lime and bitters. It arrived in a tall, perspiring glass, the dark orange liquid becoming pale as it travelled down the highball, the bottom third of the drink crystal clear. She took a nervous sip, feeling the fizz burn against the back of her throat. They had agreed to meet at the Marlinspike, one of only 3 pubs in town. Recently renovated, it now sat at the top of the pecking order according to the locals. The view from the small balcony across the expansive beachfront probably the main factor. That was where they were now perched, seated at a classic wooden plank table, seagulls squawking around them keen for a dropped chip or fumbled cracker. The large red and white Stella Artois umbrella provided adequate shade, its edges flapping in the soft breeze. J.D. sat opposite her. He sent off a text message with one hand as he sculled the remains of his second beer with the other, letting out a loud as he finished. He clunked his glass down on the table alongside the first empty, lines of froth sliding down its walls like sea foam in the shallows. "Thanks for coming, Charlotte," he mumbled as he popped a small handful of peanuts into his mouth. "We've had a bit of a breakthrough in the case, and I thought it'd be better if we—" "Me first," Charlotte interrupted. She was anxious to confront him with her news. It had been troubling her all afternoon, the apprehension made worse by the fact she couldn't tell a soul. "I think what I've got to say trumps anything you—" "No, I think not." Her tone was sharper than she intended. J.D. closed his mouth and sat back in his seat, his eyebrows raised in surprise. Charlotte took another swig of her drink, the cool liquid doing little to quell the fire inside. She stared at her partner, the man she had trusted without hesitation for so many years. The man who had lived through an ordeal that no parent should ever have to experience. A nightmare that had almost destroyed his life. Had he finally cracked? She took a deep breath. "Tell me about Norman Bachmeyer." She watched his face for any signs of guilt. "What about him?" J.D. said, looking away from her. "He's a dirty, stinking, homeless bastard. What more is there to say?" "I know what happened," Charlotte said. "With Norman and the assault in Westvale? Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what exactly?" J.D. exclaimed, his face reddening with each passing second. "That a stupid drunk made an unsubstantiated accusation that was never proven? Are you kidding me? Just because I had a run-in with him before—" "Not that it matters, but it was around the time Isaac—" J.D. paused mid-sentence, his face screwed up in pain at even the mention of his son's name. "Look, what are you inferring anyway?" "I'm not inferring anything. Can I get you another?" The barman stopped when he realised he'd interrupted something. A plastic tray laden with serviettes balanced on his left hand, his eyes glued to the confrontation before him. Bending down, he picked up J.D.'s discarded glass. "Is there anything else I can—" "We're fine, thank you." Charlotte flipped her ID out of her pocket and flashed it at him. The badge always worked miracles, the instant shut-up. The barman apologised and spun on his heel, scampering back inside. "What the fuck is this, Charlotte?" J.D. said, his voice strained. "You've lost the plot, seriously." "Even if you are telling the truth, why keep it from me?" Charlotte countered. "Why hide the fact that you've had dealings with Norman in the past? I had to find this out from someone other than you, so of course that's made me suspicious." J.D. glowered at her. Charlotte had never seen him this irate before, and it frightened her. Silence filled the air between them as each waited for the other to make the next move. One paused in expectation, the other disgust. "It's not what you think," JD finally said. The last thing Charlotte needed was a scene. So she spoke as calmly as she could, despite the swirling in her stomach. "The evidence took me to Joseph and to Norman. I dealt with them both, and at this stage, they still remain suspects, even when it gets personal. I follow what I find, and if you were me right now, I know you'd be doing exactly the same thing." JD shook his head and pushed himself up from the table, gathering his phone and keys. He gazed at her from beneath hooded eyes. "I suppose I'm still free to leave," he said, acid in his voice. "Not under arrest, am I?" "Of course not," Charlotte answered. Her shoulders slumped, disappointed. "It wasn't meant to go like this, JD. I just wanted to talk." Reaching out, she tried to grasp his hand, but he wrenched it away. "Please don't go. We still need to talk about—" "I've got nothing to say to you. Nothing." He took off through the foyer of the pub, almost colliding with the glass sliding doors at the front before they slid open, making way for his escape. Charlotte sat still, stunned. Perhaps she was naive, but she'd never considered the meeting would end like this. Not only were they colleagues, they were friends. Maybe she had underestimated the depth of her accusations, or maybe she was right on the money. Either way, she couldn't let him leave. The whole Johnny scenario still played on her mind. If JD had kept the incident with Norman from her, what other aspects of his past was he hiding? Wasn't there a very real chance he was the Johnny they were searching for? The victim of horrendous abuse as a child? Could that have even been his motivation to become a police officer? Tossing her phone into her small red clutch, Charlotte hurried through the foyer in pursuit, dodging past 3 young guys on their way in, all dressed in tight, ripped jeans and printed T-shirts, with the standard messy hair and pencil-thin mustaches. The barman kept watch, a glass and tea towel frozen in his hands. With no time to explain, she dashed through the front doors. She was too late. JD's car sped out of the car park, tyres screeching as he turned and accelerated away. Charlotte snatched her phone back out of her bag and tried to call him, desperate to calm the waters before things got any more out of control. JD had overreacted, but she had been the cause of it. His voicemail was the only answer. Hanging up, she slumped down on a nearby bench, a seagull taking flight in panic. She gazed up the now empty road, but with each passing minute, she knew he wasn't coming back. His reaction left her with 2 possible scenarios. The first was that her false allegations had driven him away, their relationship possibly beyond repair. He had a thick skin, she knew that, but maybe the fact that all of this was coming from her, the person he trusted with his life on a daily basis, had tipped him over the edge. Hopefully, time could deal with that. The second scenario wasn't quite so easy to diffuse. In that one, the claims she made were true, and JD was indeed responsible for everything that had taken place, right back to the first killing of Father Watson 2 years ago. And if that were true, she may have just thrown fuel onto his already lit and burning fuse. Was her partner about to go bang? Her thoughts were interrupted by the shrill ringing of her phone. Still clutched in her hand, she held it up, hopeful that JD had decided to reach out. Private caller flashed back at her. She brought the phone to her ear hesitantly. "Hello? Charlotte speaking?" "Detective Callahan, it's Caitlin McBride. We need to talk." Charlotte almost dropped the phone. Not only had Caitlin contacted her, but she'd actually said 2 sentences in a row. "Now's not really a good time, Caitlin. I know your secret." Charlotte balked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Look, that's not why I rang, honestly. I just needed to get your attention. Don't stress, your illness is safe with me. I'm a journo, but I'm not that much of a lowlife. Besides, my mum is a breast cancer survivor, so I have some idea of what you're going through, And to be still working while undergoing treatment? And keep it all hidden? Well, I'm in awe, to be quite honest. Anyway, I figured I should do something to help you out. I want you to solve this thing the whole town does. Girl power and all that, you know? Charlotte could barely comprehend what she was hearing. The words were coming so far from left field they were way up in the bleachers. And how the hell did Caitlin know about her illness anyway? Yeah, I guess, she said. What have you got? It's about your suspect, Norman Bachmeyer. What about him? You know where he is? I do, but you're not going to like it. I've got a contact at Westvale Hospital who works in the psych facility there. Norman was admitted overnight after he turned up at emergency, ranting and raving. He's out of his mind, Detective. You won't get anything sensible from him for a while, if ever. You didn't hear this from me, but I have it on good authority that his treating psychiatrist believes there's no way he'd have the mental capacity to commit these crimes, especially without leaving any forensic evidence behind. He's a dirty, drunk hobo who wouldn't know a shower if he slipped over in one. The bag of shit trick on the church steps, that seems more like his style. It's just my opinion, Detective, but I think it might be time he focused on a new suspect. Charlotte hung up the phone. She had to talk to J.D. now. Chapter 36. Driving back to the station in the hopes of finding J.D. there, Charlotte was astounded by the turns this case had taken. Joseph, Norman, J.D., Garcelle, the mysterious Johnny. The list had grown way beyond what she was comfortable with. If she were good at her job, shouldn't the number of potential suspects be shrinking? Where the hell was this all going to end? She'd already messed up her relationship with her brother. She couldn't lose J.D. too. She parked her car and climbed from the driver's seat under the soft haze of a lone streetlight. Not a soul was present. Not even a uniform out the back choking back a durry, although she could still smell the vague whiff of tobacco as her pass activated the rear doors. Inside, the building was silent, apart from the occasional buzz of radio transmission warbling out from the station's intercom. Charlotte made her way along the well-worn beige carpeted hallway, as she had done 1,000,000 times, taking the right turn towards the detective's domain. Shouldering the door to the CIU muster room, she burst through. Taking in the empty desks, Charlotte knew her trip had been wasted. J.D. was way too smart to head back to work. It was always going to be the first place she would check. As she stood alone, contemplating her next move, her gaze flowed from one screensaver to the next, the department logo bouncing around like a lonesome game of Pong. That thought brought a smile to her face. Memories of playing for hours against Joseph at their grandparents' house when they were little dancing in her mind, the competition fierce even at a young age. Now look at us. Charlotte turned for the door, poised, about to push back through. She was distracted by a sudden noise. It was a voice, a female voice, she was almost certain, barely audible, snatching back a giggle. Charlotte eased the door closed and turned. There it was again. Another giggle, a lilting, suggestive murmur, the kind of which she hadn't heard within these walls before. The bedroom, maybe, but the office? She crept in the direction of the sound. It was coming from the offices at the end of the room. Edging past the side window in the semi-darkness, she heard the laugh a third time. Surely it wasn't a cleaner. Charlotte kept moving until she was poised outside Dash's office, the door closed. Through the frosted glass window, she could just make out the fuzzy outline of something or someone. Grasping the handle, she rotated it quietly. Then she shoved her body against the door and burst into the room. Crashing through the doorway, Charlotte could not believe her eyes. Resting on the near corner of the desk was Dash, his pants bunched around his ankles, his hands in the dark hair of the woman kneeling in front of him. For a split second, they were oblivious to her presence. Then Dash opened his eyes and saw her. "Fuck!" he yelled, pushing the woman aside. He wrenched his pants back into place, buckling and zipping up as if his life depended on it, his face glowing redder by the second. The woman was much more composed. She simply stood upright and turned to face Charlotte, smoothing out some creases in her dress. "Oh, my God!" Charlotte stammered, her mind reeling. "You have got to be kidding me!" Caitlin McBride smiled at her as she took a seat on the edge of the desk, ignoring the fuss Dash was making behind her.
"I can explain,"
Dash said, his hands shaking.
"It's not what it looks like. Well, it is, but—"
"I don't need to know." Charlotte remained framed in the doorway, still shaking her head in shock. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, as if stumbling across this liaison meant more than it seemed to. Criminal? Absolutely not. Unethical? Perhaps, although they were two consenting adults. Inappropriate? Without a doubt. Suddenly, Caitlin's journalistic ability to sniff out a story with minimal effort didn't seem so baffling.
"It's not what you think, Charlotte,"
Dash said, sitting back in his chair, his face ashen.
"You're not going to believe this, but it's the truth. I never meant for this to happen, and I know that's the oldest line in a book, but it's true. To be honest, it started out as a motivational tool, something to help you guys out with your cases, that's all."
"Help us out with our cases?" Charlotte almost laughed out. "How the hell did you figure that?" Dash sat forward, his elbows resting on the desk, and buried his head in his hands.
"It's a small town, and people talk. That's how we get our information. Some useful, some not. But it all comes from gossip, and nothing generates buzz more than the media. Whether we like it or not, Caitlin's articles get people talking, and loose lips mean info comes our way. You know how it works."
"So what? You just ply her with info, whatever she wants, whenever she wants?" Charlotte felt her indignation rise and placed her hands on her hips. "All that case-sensitive private material given up in exchange for a blowjob? Is that really what you become?" Dash ran his fingers through his thinning hair.
"You know me better than that, Charlotte. I'm not that type of guy."
She glared at him. "Well, after what I just saw, I'd beg to differ. But why would you do that? I don't get it." He scraped his hands down his face, stretching the skin like a Halloween mask.
"It was innocent in the beginning. We were struggling with that armed robbery a few years ago, you remember? Caitlin had a meeting with me, and we came up with a mutually beneficial understanding. I fed her the info we needed to progress the job, and she got the big story. We got the scoop we needed within days and made the arrests. It was a win-win. After that, one thing led to another until we ended up here."
There was no excuse for his behaviour. Charlotte was furious, and the silence from Caitlin only compounded her rage.
"It didn't happen all the time," Dash continued, only digging his grave deeper. "Just when things were stagnating, you know? If I thought we were struggling, I'd give Caitlin a call, try to mix things up a bit, keep the pressure on, resharpen the focus. Everyone needs that once in a while."
"And what about you?" Charlotte said, turning on Caitlin. "Nothing to say for yourself? What about all that stuff you said about girl power?" "I'm just doing my job, Charlotte," Caitlin said coolly. "Whatever it takes. That's why I'm at the top of my game. Being ruthless in my line of work isn't just an asset, it's a necessity. Especially when you're a woman. You should understand that more than most. I'm taking back some power, that's all. Playing by my rules for once, and besides, he goes okay. So I'd probably do it for nothing, truth be told."
"You two deserve each other,"
Charlotte countered, but her resolve was wavering. As she strode from the room, consoled by the fact that at least her dignity remained intact, she had never felt so alone. Slamming the door behind her, she took a second to assess the mayhem her life had become. Going through breast cancer and chemotherapy, no closer to finding the culprit in the biggest case of her career, her work partner and her brother both live suspects in that case, and now her boss was selling out information to the media in exchange for sex? Surely enough was enough. Chapter 37. It was going to be easy this time. Not that the others hadn't been easy, but this one was so simple it was ridiculous. How dare that priest try to turn this around onto him, defiant old bastard?
But he'd understand soon, better than anyone. As he sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, the doubt started to rise again. It had been like this his whole lonely adult life. But he knew what he had to do, as much as he may not want to. This was bigger than him, and he was beholden to all the children who had already been hurt, as well as all those precious ones who didn't realize what was in their future, coming to strike them down. If he could prevent that, he would take the chance. He was parked outside the motivation factory in the last spot of the gym's rear car park. It was the perfect venue to carry out his plans with minimal chance of detection. Given that the town's population wasn't massive to start off with, the number of fitness fanatics was small. He was surprised, given the hysteria that now gripped the town, that it hadn't closed. That would have been the safest thing to do, but as usual, common sense didn't play a huge part in day-to-day life. The dollar ruled, and if people had paid for a service, they expected to get it. "No murderer is going to stop me exercising," he could almost hear the fitness-obsessed muttering. He sat low in his seat and watched as they came and went. Men and women in their tight clothing, muscles rippling, sweat beaded down their backs. His dark-tinted windows rendered him almost invisible to anyone passing by, a bag tucked under his seat at the ready. Vehicles came and went until only his and one other remained. A small Hyundai hatch, Fanta orange, belonging to a petite brunette who had yet to return to her car. He could see her through the gym's large glass doors, pounding out kilometre after kilometre on the treadmill, her iPod blasting into her ears as she ran. Evening fell, and as the light outside faded, the lights inside the gym became brighter. The windows were reflective, but the doors were not. Finally, she began walking in the direction of the exit, wiping her face with a towel. She scooped up her drink bottle and headed out the doors, making her way towards her car. How could she be so stupid? It was pitch black now. The golden streetlights were lit, but their glow didn't extend to the car park. There were no CCTV cameras on the external walls of the premises, other than the one positioned over the entry doors, something he'd made certain of. He stepped from his vehicle, bag in hand. The woman crossed the car park, pulling her hair back into a ponytail that she fumbled around with, securing it as she walked. Arms up, stomach taut, vulnerable and completely unaware. "Evening," he said as he approached her. "Hi." She glanced up at him before tilting her head down to finish tying her hair. Whack! He punched her in her exposed solar plexus with such force that the air rushed from her lungs and collided with his cheek. She crumpled to the ground, eyes wide with shock. Standing over her in the darkness, he stared down as she struggled for breath, like a fish that had flipped itself out of its tank and now found itself wallowing on the kitchen floor in a puddle of water far too shallow to survive in. He knelt down and twisted her like an oversized rag doll, bending her into the shape he wanted without any resistance. "Just relax," he said, slinging her up and over his shoulder like a bag of spuds. He flung open the back passenger door and shoved her inside. After securing her wrists and ankles with cable ties, he shoved a handkerchief in her mouth and ran electrical tape around her head several times, lodging it in position. Then he climbed into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. He had done it again. This time, Father Callahan would get the message loud and clear, and hopefully he might catch a glimpse of what it had been like for him the last couple of decades, to wrestle so hard with yourself it was exhausting, even to keep your head above water. With a bit of luck, he might just drown in the process. Chapter 38. Charlotte was exhausted. Not only had the effects of the day's developments with both JD and Dash begun to take their toll, but the nausea had set right in to the point where she had to have a bucket at the ready next to the couch on which she now lay. She still hadn't heard from JD, despite leaving several messages pleading for him to call her. In short, it had been a day straight from hell. It was getting late, but she couldn't sleep, even though she was so tired she could barely hold her head up. As soon as she closed her eyes, her mind raced. Even the jigsaw, one of her few delights in life at the moment, had beaten her.
4 pieces was all she had managed before the urge to lie down had overcome her. This level of fatigue was something new, worse than 3 night shifts in a row, in winter. She had spoken to Jack earlier in the night, a much-needed chat where they had cleared the air after the awkwardness of their almost sex. They'd only exchanged some perfunctory text messages since that night, and Charlotte was relieved the ice had melted. But despite things being back to normal, she still needed some alone time. So she'd explained to Jack that she seemed to be coming down with the flu and that it was best he stayed away. Of course, after all that, he wanted to visit and wouldn't take no for an answer. Reluctantly, she had agreed to him coming over, even though it was late. He had told her he would be there before midnight, just to drop by and say hello. She couldn't think of anything worse, but knew she had to accept. As bad as she felt, she wanted to make things right. She lay on the couch, blanket pulled up to her chin. Oscar was nestled in beside her, purring like a well-serviced Porsche. Even though she felt like shit, she knew life could be worse. She could be Joseph, or JD, or Dash. She had seen her brother on the news, and the shock of it had made her breath catch. He had looked so old, as fragile as she had ever seen him. Murder allegations, arrested by his sister, then assaulted in his own church. Now that was a bad week. It seemed the Callahans had done something to piss off the gods somewhere along the line. The doorbell rang, startling Oscar from his comfortable position. He arched his back as he stood on all fours, snarling in the direction of the front door, his sandpaper tongue protruding out from his jaw-breaking yawn. Like his owner, he didn't want to be disturbed. Charlotte rose and shuffled her way across the lounge room, her feet dragging and her head throbbing. The bell rang again before she got to the door, reverberating in her brain. What had she been thinking, agreeing to this? She just needed to get it over with, placate him, do the right thing, and then see him on his way. Opening the door, she saw the look of surprise on Jack's face. He obviously hadn't been prepared for what chemo did to a person, perhaps because he didn't know she was going through it. Guilt shot through her as she held onto the door handle for support. Maybe it was time to tell him. "Come in. Don't get too close, though, yeah?" "Jeepers, you don't look the best." "No shit, Sherlock." He stepped in and hugged her before standing back, as if concerned she was going to infect him with the Black Plague. He raised a finger from each hand and made the shape of a crucifix, warding off the vampire. If he'd had a garlic necklace, Charlotte was sure he'd be wearing it, which would have been an improvement on the grey scarf he had wrapped around his neck. At times his fashion sense was more George Michael than George Clooney. "A scarf? Really?" Charlotte asked, nudging him in the ribs as she flicked out her other hand, unsuccessfully trying to snatch it. "Trying to hide a love bite from your other girlfriend, are you?" Jack evaded her prying hands, weaving boxer-like. "As if one girlfriend isn't enough for me, especially a crook one like you. Now get back on that couch and I'll make you a cuppa." Momentarily buzzed from the girlfriend label, Charlotte trundled back to the couch and flopped onto it as Jack strode into the kitchen, making himself at home. Normally she would have loved the intrusion, but right now, she just wanted it over with, fast. "How long have you felt like this, Charles?" he called from the kitchen, trying to make himself heard over the drone of the coffee machine. "Most of the day," she said, lying her head back on the cushions. "It's just one of those things." "One of those things?" Jack said doubtfully. "You've been sick on and off for weeks now, months even. You work too hard, I've told you that. You need a few weeks off, maybe a holiday somewhere, away from all this crap." Charlotte blinked as tears unexpectedly pricked her eyes. She hated lying to him, and she knew the time was coming when she had to tell him the truth. This was a battle she had been prepared to fight on her own, and she'd always thought confiding in Jack would only make things worse. He would cry, she would cry. He would mollycoddle her and tell her she had to quit her job and focus on her health. Then the true reality of her situation, and her mortality, would only slap her in the face even harder. Up until now, she had felt as though she had at least some control over her destiny, whatever that might entail. but it was time to relinquish that control. Yeah, maybe you're right. She pictured Hawaii in her mind. Waikiki Beach at sunset, gentle waves lapping the shore, grass skirt, sipping a cocktail directly from a coconut. If only. One sugar or none tonight? He closed the fridge door and stood in the doorway holding the milk. I'm sweet enough tonight, she answered. And just black will be perfect, thanks. She took a deep breath. Hey, when you're finished, there's something I need to talk to you about, she said as he walked back into the kitchen. Just at that moment, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it off the coffee table, secretly relieved at the interruption. It was JD, at last. She answered it on speaker, too exhausted to hold the phone to her ear. Jack re-entered the room and she motioned for him to keep quiet. JD, I'm so glad you called. She was met with silence. Her concern grew. Was this the moment JD's secret life and his real world collided? Then he cleared his throat. Don't read more into this than you should, he said, his voice wavering. I'm calling as a professional courtesy only, nothing more. Okay, Charlotte said warily, feeling her heart lodge in her throat. Jack had a quizzical look on his face, unaware of the dynamic that had crystallized between her and her partner earlier. Whatever you want, JD. I'm just glad you're okay, she said, holding back on the whole Dash scenario until he had gotten everything off his chest. Right, he mumbled. Whatever. Anyway, I only called to tell you there's been a development in the case. That's if you're still interested and haven't already convicted me for it. Charlotte knew JD was hurt, but if he'd been playing the game this whole time, how was she to know this wasn't an act too? He seemed genuinely wounded, but the line between what was real and what wasn't had become so blurred, words alone weren't going to bring things into focus. Are you sitting down? JD asked. Because you're not going to like what I've got to say. At this point, there wasn't much else Charlotte was capable of other than sitting or lying. She looked nervously at Jack, hoping she wasn't about to let him in on something she shouldn't. By the look on his face, he was enjoying the voyeurism of it all. I'm sitting. What have you got then? She said. Well, it's about Joseph. You saw him on the news about the assault? Yeah, I did, she answered hesitantly, not sure where this was going. I thought he looked pretty bad, actually. Very tired, almost beaten down. She felt another wave of sadness wash over her at what her brother was being forced to endure, developments she seemed powerless to stop. I agree, JD replied. But there may be another reason for that. Not long after that news segment, I received a call at the station about it. Well, not exactly about that, more about Joseph himself than the actual assault. I was going to tell you earlier, but then you... Well, anyway, it seems that someone recognized him. I'm not surprised, Charlotte said, still confused. Most people in the town know his face. Yeah, well, that's the problem. The guy I spoke to remembers him from somewhere else. Look, there's no easy way to break this to you, so I'm just going to say it. This person is alleging a series of historic child sexual assaults that occurred on church premises back in the 80s, and he's adamant Joseph was one of the offenders, that he was there when it all happened. Charlotte reached for the phone before she realized it was too late and withdrew her hand sharply, as if she'd rested it on a hot plate. Her heart raced as another impossible burden came crashing down on her. When was it all going to stop? Joseph, one of those priests? You're fucking kidding me. She was struggling to breathe. Surely this was a joke. Someone just out to get him. Are you serious? She said, her words running into each other. I don't know what to say. Has he got any evidence for what he's claiming? This is just... Holy fuck, JD. This is serious. You know how they treat cases like this. His career will be shot forever, whether he's guilty or not. Charlotte knew her brother, knew he would never do something like that, not in a million lifetimes. She'd grown up with this man. There was no way he could be guilty of that type of behavior.
He was a pillar of the community, with an unwavering sense of morals, who lived his life according to how the scriptures dictated it, full of compassion, love, honesty, and integrity. He despised that the church had developed a reputation for being abusive towards vulnerable children, and had many times voiced his disgust and shame for his profession whenever any of those sorts of allegations hit the headlines. He cries in the movies all the time, she thought, remembering Joseph wiping tears away in the darkness of the cinema. Doesn't that mean something?
I know this is a shock, but just try to breathe, JD said, a vain attempt to calm her down. He's your brother, and I'm not about to run to the press or go dragging him out of the church by the scruff of his neck. I'm going to get the full story, backed up by whatever evidence I can find, before I take any action. But the accusation is out there now, so it has to be investigated. I've got no choice. JD's words were slipping in one ear and out the other. Joseph, a pedophile? She looked across at Jack and saw his mouth was agape, his chin almost dragging on the floor. She shook her head. Who's the guy? Maybe I know him and what his agenda might be. His name's Ben Willett. I haven't met him yet, only spoken to him over the phone. But I'll be honest with you, Charlotte, he seems genuine. He's coming in tomorrow to make a statement, and I'll go from there. But I thought you should know. We're still partners, and I can't change that just yet. Yeah, thanks. Charlotte could see Jack transfixed, his eyes wide, staring at the phone, like it was the second coming of Christ himself. Oh, one more thing, JD said. Great. There's more, Charlotte said with a sigh. She didn't know how much more she could take. That Hawaii vacation was sounding better by the minute. You might have heard on the grapevine we've been looking for someone, another possible suspect. In reporting the incident to me, Ben mentioned another young boy who was with him at the time of the alleged offences, and was also subject to the abuse. Let's face it, if Ben recognised Joseph as one of his attackers, and if he's telling the truth about it, then there's every chance this other guy did too. What's more, Ben thought that the other victim lived down this way somewhere. So, I looked into it, got a warrant for some access to council records and electoral rolls, as well as making some discreet inquiries with the right people in the church, and I've managed to locate him. Charlotte. There's every chance you might even know him. He owns that car dealership on the way out of town, just after the bend. You know the one? The words hung in the air like hot air balloons that Charlotte just wanted to burst. She looked at Jack, whose eyes were already moving from the phone to her face as realization hit. They stared at each other, frozen, as JD continued, the world as Charlotte knew it tilting on its axis and tipping her off. Yeah, we were looking for a guy named Johnny, surname unknown. Thanks to the church, we were able to confirm his full name was Jonathan Talbot. Turns out he now goes by Jack. Jack Talbot? He's definitely worth a look. He's got my senses tingling. Before she could even scream, Jack grabbed the phone and threw it hard at the wall, where it shattered to pieces spectacularly. This ends CD 6.